The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Sweet Memories Bakery's windows. Daniel Morris stood in the doorway, his weathered hands resting protectively on his 6-year-old daughter Lily's shoulders. His eyes, carrying the quiet gravity of a man who had known profound loss, settled on a solitary figure. A young woman sat motionless in her wheelchair for a simple white cake adorned with 22 flickering candles. Alone on her birthday. Lily tugged at her father's shirt, whispering urgently, "Daddy, nobody should be alone on their birthday." Daniel nodded, the decision forming through the same instinct that guided his hands when working with difficult wood. Some things you just knew in your bones. "Excuse me," Daniel said, his voice warm yet carrying the resonant strength of a man accustomed to being heard. "May we join you? No one should eat birthday cake alone." The young woman looked up, surprise flashing across her features. In the heartbeat of silence that followed, destinies began to intertwine in ways none of them could possibly imagine. The workshop smelled of fresh-cut pine and linseed oil. Morning light streamed through high windows. Daniel Morris ran his hand along the grain of a red oak plank, feeling the story written within its rings. 30 years of life had taught him that wood, like people, carried its history in its very fiber. The radio played softly, Johnny Cash singing about walking the line, as Lily sat at her small workbench, carefully sanding a wooden duck. "Easy with the grain, little bug," Daniel instructed. "Let the wood tell you which way it wants to go." Lily nodded solemnly. At 6 years old, she already showed a natural feel for woodworking that made Daniel's chest tighten with both pride and grief. Sarah would have loved seeing this. The workshop, an old converted barn on the outskirts of town, was more than Daniel's livelihood. It was his sanctuary, the place where he had slowly rebuilt himself after Sarah's death 5 years ago. The military had taught him discipline. Carpentry had taught him patience. Both had saved him in different ways. In the corner stood his latest project, a specialized chair with carefully calibrated supports designed for a veteran with back injuries. It wasn't just furniture. It was freedom disguised as wood and leather. The phone rang. Daniel wiped his hands on his apron before answering. "Morris Woodworking," he answered, voice steady and direct. "Mr. Morris, this is Margaret from Dr. Reynolds' office. I'm calling about Jason's mobility chair." Daniel's eyes moved to the chair in the corner. "It'll be ready tomorrow as promised. I've added some modifications to the armrest that should give him better leverage for transfers. That's why I'm calling. He mentioned difficulty with transfers, and Dr. Reynolds wondered if you might deliver it personally to help with the fitting." "Of course, I always do final adjustments on site." After hanging up, Daniel returned to his workbench, making notes in his leather-bound journal. His military precision evident in the careful measurements and detailed drawings. "Daddy, can we go to Sweet Memories today?" Lily asked. "It's Mommy's birthday." Daniel checked his watch, a simple timepiece with a worn leather strap that had survived 2 tours overseas. "Yes, little bug, we'll go this afternoon. We'll take her favorite flowers too." Lily beamed, "The yellow ones that look like sunshine." "Daffodils." Daniel nodded, his heart squeezing. "The ones that come back every spring, no matter how hard the winter." The ritual had become sacred, visiting the bakery on Sarah's birthday, ordering her favorite lemon cake, then taking daffodils to the cemetery. Daniel had learned that grief didn't disappear. You built your life around it the way a river shapes itself around an immovable stone. But Eva Lancaster stared out the window of her expansive bedroom, watching gardeners tend to the immaculate grounds of the Lancaster estate. From her wheelchair, the world always looked different, viewed from a perpetual seated position that altered perspectives in ways few understood. 4 years in this chair. 4 years since the drunk driver had shattered not just her spine, but the trajectory of her entire life. At 22, when others her age were finishing college or backpacking through Europe, Eva was fighting daily battles with her own body. The knock on her door was predictable, 10:30 a.m. time for physical therapy. "Come in," she called, turning her wheelchair with practiced ease. Nancy, her physical therapist, entered with a professional smile Eva had come to both appreciate and resent. Not Nancy's fault, she was good at her job and genuinely kind, but she was also paid to care, a distinction that hollowed out even the warmest interactions. "Good morning, Eva. Ready to work those upper body muscles?" Eva nodded, moving toward the home gym her father had installed after the accident. State-of-the-art equipment, the best money could buy. Richard Lancaster's solution to everything: throw money at the problem until it went away. The session was grueling. Eva pushed herself hard, not out of determination, but from a place that bordered on defiance. Her biceps strained as she pulled herself up on the bars, sweat beading on her forehead. "Excellent progress," Nancy encouraged. Your upper body strength has improved significantly. Eva lowered herself back into her chair, breathing heavily. Strong arms make up for useless legs, I suppose. Nancy's expression softened. They make you independent. That's what matters. Independence, a relative term when you lived in a gilded cage. Eva had all the independence money could buy, a customized wheelchair, a specially adapted vehicle she rarely used round-the-clock staff. What she didn't have was genuine connection. After therapy, Eva wheeled herself to the massive kitchen where Maria, the longtime family cook, was preparing lunch. "Ah, Miss Eva." Maria smiled, the only person in the house whose warmth felt untainted by financial transaction. "I made your favorite avocado toast with heirloom tomatoes." "Thanks, Maria. Is my father home?" Maria's expression answered before her words did. "Mr. Lancaster called. The Tokyo meeting is running long. He won't be back until next week." Of course, another canceled visit, another business emergency. "Miss Eva," Maria hesitated, wiping her hands on her apron, "it's your birthday next week. Any special requests?" "Birthday. 23. Another milestone to be marked without celebration." "Nothing special, Maria. Thank you for remembering, though." Maria frowned slightly. "Your father asked me to arrange dinner at Le Bistro. He's reserved the private room." Eva's laugh held no humor. "Did he specify which secretary would attend in his place this time?" "Eva, I'm sorry, Maria, that wasn't fair." Eva sighed, running a hand through her dark hair. "Tell him thank you, but I'd prefer something simpler this year. Maybe just a cake from Sweet Memories downtown. Their lemon cake is amazing." Maria's eyes softened. "I'll take care of it." Later in the vast Lancaster library, Eva lost herself in books, as she often did. Her father's voice interrupted her reading, startling her. Richard Lancaster stood in the doorway, his imposing figure impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, despite having just stepped off an international flight. "Eva, I didn't realize you'd be in here." Eva marked her place in the book. "Dad, I thought you were in Tokyo until next week." Wrap things up early. He stepped into the room, his movements precise and controlled. At 60, Richard Lancaster commanded attention. Silver-streaked dark hair, penetrating gray eyes that had intimidated countless business rivals, and a posture that never relaxed even at home. "How are you feeling?" he asked, the question clinical rather than paternal. "The same." Eva resisted the urge to add "still paralyzed" to her answer. "How was Tokyo?" "Productive. We're expanding the medical devices division." He glanced at her wheelchair, the latest model, custom-built and exorbitantly priced. "Any issues with the chair?" "It's fine." It wasn't. The back support caused pressure points after a few hours, and the joystick control was overly sensitive, but explaining would lead to another expensive replacement without addressing the actual problems. "Good." He checked his watch, a habit Eva had noticed increasingly since her accident. Time with her had become something to measure, to allocate efficiently. "I have calls to make. We'll have dinner tomorrow." It wasn't a question or a suggestion. Richard Lancaster didn't ask. He informed. "About my birthday next week," Eva began. "I'd prefer something simple. Maria mentioned that, if that's what you want." He hesitated at the doorway. "The Japanese team has developed a promising new spinal stimulation technology. Early trials show—" "Dad?" Eva interrupted gently. "I don't need another medical update. I've accepted my condition." The flash of discomfort across his features was brief but unmistakable. Richard Lancaster could solve any business crisis but remained helpless before his daughter's paralysis. It was the one problem his money and influence couldn't fix. "We'll talk tomorrow," he said, finally retreating behind his CEO mask. With a nod, he was gone, leaving Eva alone with her books and the echoing silence of the too-large house. Bustham. Sweet Memories Bakery sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd, its bay windows and cheerful blue awning, a welcome contrast to the sleek modernism taking over downtown. Daniel held the door open as Lily bounded in, the bell chiming their arrival. The familiar scent of vanilla and butter embraced them, along with the warm smile of Eleanor, the bakery's owner, for over 30 years. "There's my favorite woodworker and his assistant," Eleanor called from behind the counter. "Right on time." Daniel smiled, the expression softening the weathered lines of his face. "We're here for Sarah's birthday cake." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Lemon cake with vanilla buttercream. I made it fresh this morning." While Eleanor boxed the cake, Lily pressed her nose against the display case, eyeing the colorful macarons and elaborately decorated cupcakes. "Can I have the blue butterfly one, Daddy?" she asked, pointing to a cupcake topped with an intricate fondant butterfly. "Of course, little bug." Daniel ruffled her hair, his touch gentle despite his strong hands. They settled at a table by the window, the afternoon sun warming the space. Daniel watched as Lily carefully removed the butterfly from her cupcake, setting it aside, for later, as she always did with special decorations. "Do you think Mommy can see us from heaven?" Lily asked a question she posed in some form every year. Daniel's heart tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I believe she can, yes." "Does she like that we still celebrate her birthday?" Daniel took a sip of his coffee. "I think it makes her very happy. Birthdays are for remembering how glad we are that someone was born, even if they're not with us anymore." The bell above the door chimed again. Daniel glanced up out of habit, a veteran's instinct to always know who was entering a room. A woman in a wheelchair navigated through the door with practiced precision, though Daniel noted the slight wince as she maneuvered the threshold. His carpenter's eye immediately assessed the wheelchair, high-end but poorly fitted to its user. The armrests were too high for her proportions, forcing her shoulders into an unnatural position. The seat depth looked excessive for her frame, likely causing pressure against the backs of her knees. Well-intentioned engineering without practical understanding of the human body's needs. The woman approached the counter, exchanging words with Eleanor that Daniel couldn't hear. Something in her posture spoke of isolation, the careful containment of someone accustomed to navigating a world not designed for them. Eleanor nodded sympathetically, then gestured toward the kitchen, apparently explaining a wait time for whatever had been ordered. Daniel returned his attention to Lily, who was now drawing on a napkin with the colored pencils they always carried. She was sketching a surprisingly recognizable rendering of their workshop, complete with tiny wood shavings on the floor. "That's really good, little bug," he praised, genuine admiration in his voice. "You've captured the light from the east window perfectly." Eleanor approached their table with a gentle smile. "Daniel, I hate to ask, but could you look at my front door when you have a moment? The hinge is catching." Daniel smiled. "I'd be happy to take a look now." While Lily continued drawing, and Daniel examined the door, quickly identifying the issue. The bottom hinge had worked loose, causing the door to drag. With Eleanor's toolkit kept specifically for Daniel's occasional fixes, he made the necessary adjustments, the methodical work as natural to him as a breathing. "You're a lifesaver." Eleanor sighed as the door swung smoothly. "What do I owe you?" Daniel shook his head. "Just keeping my favorite cake supplier operational." As Daniel returned to their table, he noticed the woman in the wheelchair, now sitting alone before a small white cake adorned with candles. No one else joined her, no friends gathering for a celebration. The solitude of the scene struck him with unexpected force. Lily followed his gaze, her young eyes observing with the unfiltered clarity of childhood. "Daddy," she whispered, though not quietly enough, "that lady is all alone with her birthday cake. That's sad." Daniel placed a gentle hand on his daughter's shoulder, but before he could respond, he saw the woman's shoulders stiffen slightly. She had overheard. "Lily," he said quietly, "sometimes people enjoy being alone." But Lily's moral compass, formed by a father who had taught her that kindness was non-negotiable, had already determined their course of action. She slid from her chair, clutching her precious fondant butterfly, and looked up at Daniel with unwavering certainty. "Daddy, you said nobody should be alone on their birthday. That's why we always bring Mommy's favorite flowers, even though she's in heaven." Daniel felt a surge of complex emotions, pride in his daughter's compassion, concern about intruding on a stranger's privacy, and recognition of a truth he himself had taught her. His hesitation lasted only seconds before he nodded, rising from his chair. "You're right, little bug. Let's see if she'd like some company." They approached the table, Daniel's stride measured but confident, Lily practically skipping beside him. The woman looked up, surprise evident in her features. Up close, Daniel could see she was younger than he'd initially thought, early 20s perhaps, with dark hair that framed an elegant face whose natural beauty seemed at odds with the wariness in her eyes. "Excuse me," Daniel said, his voice gentle but carrying the natural authority of a man comfortable in his own skin. "My daughter and I were wondering if we might join you. No one should celebrate alone." The woman's expression cycled rapidly through surprise, suspicion, and something harder to define, perhaps longing. Her gaze shifted between Daniel and Lily, lingering on the child's earnest face. "I'm Lily," his daughter announced, stepping forward with the direct approach of childhood. "It's your birthday? It's my mommy's birthday too, but she's in heaven now. Is that your favorite cake? Mine is chocolate with sprinkles, but Daddy says everyone has different favorites, and that's okay." A smile flickered across the woman's face, brief but genuine, like sunlight breaking momentarily through clouds. "It's lemon," she said, her voice softer than Daniel expected with the polished enunciation of expensive education. "Lemon with vanilla buttercream. That's my mommy's favorite too." Lily exclaimed, her eyes widening at this cosmic coincidence. Daddy, it's the same. Daniel smiled, pulling out a chair. Mind if we sit? I'm Daniel, by the way. Daniel Morris. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Eva Lancaster. As Daniel settled into the chair, he noticed Eva adjusting her position with a subtle wince that most would miss. His trained eye caught the source immediately. The chair was causing pressure points along her lower back, the cushioning inadequate for extended sitting. Happy birthday, Eva, he said simply. Eva's eyes met his, searching for the pity she'd grown accustomed to finding in strangers' gazes. Instead, she found only straightforward warmth in the clear-eyed regard of a man who saw her, not just her wheelchair. Thank you, she replied, then added with unexpected candor, this isn't exactly how I planned to spend my 23rd birthday, but here we are. Plans have a way of rearranging themselves, Daniel acknowledged. Lily, oblivious to the undercurrents of adult conversation, held out her fondant butterfly. This is for you, for your birthday. Butterflies mean new beginnings, Daddy told me that. Eva accepted the small decoration, genuine surprise softening her features. That's very kind of you, Lily. Are you here all alone? Lily asked with a child's directness. Lily, Daniel gently admonished, that's a personal question. It's all right, Eva assured him. Yes, I am. My father had a business emergency as usual. The last words carried a bitterness she hadn't intended to reveal. Daniel nodded, offering neither platitudes nor prying questions. His silence created a space that invited confidence without demanding it, a rare skill in a world of reflexive responses. The cake looks delicious, he observed instead. Eleanor's lemon cake is famous around here. It was my mother's recipe, actually, Eva explained. Eleanor and my mom were friends in college. After Mom died, Eleanor kept making it. It's one of the few traditions I've managed to maintain. Daniel's eyes met hers with new understanding. Sarah, my late wife, loved Eleanor's lemon cake too. Lily and I come here every year on her birthday. May 15th, Lily added helpfully. That's today. Eva's eyes widened slightly. Today is your mother's birthday. Lily nodded solemnly. And your birthday too. That's why it was extra important to say hello. Daddy says coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous. Eva glanced at Daniel, a question in her eyes. Einstein actually, he clarified with a small smile. Though I might have paraphrased for a 6-year-old. For the first time, Eva laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even her. My mother would have loved that quote. She was a physics professor before she got sick. The candles on Eva's cake flickered, the wax beginning to drip onto the white frosting. You should make a wish, Lily advised seriously, before all the candles melt. Eva looked at the flames, hesitating. I haven't made a birthday wish since the accident, she admitted quietly. Daniel's gaze held steady, no judgment in his blue eyes. Maybe this year is different. Something in his tone, the simple certainty that change was possible, made Eva close her eyes. She sat motionless for a moment, then leaned forward and blew out all 23 candles in one breath. Lily clapped delightedly. Did you wish for something good? Eva smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. I think I did, yes. As they shared the cake, Eva insisting they help her eat it, a peculiar ease developed between them. Daniel spoke about his woodworking, explaining his current project designing specialized furniture for people with mobility challenges. Most mass-produced mobility aids are designed by engineers who've never spent a day with limited mobility. He explained, passion evident in his voice. They solve the mechanical problem without addressing the human experience. Eva listened with growing interest. That's exactly it. My wheelchair costs more than some cars, but after an hour, my shoulders ache and my lower back feels like it's on fire. Daniel nodded, unsurprised. The armrests are too high for your proportions, and the back support lacks proper lumbar cushioning. Eva stared at him. How could you possibly know that? I notice how things fit together or don't, he answered simply. It's both a gift and a curse. I can't walk into a room without assessing the joinery of every piece of furniture. Daddy fixes things, Lily contributed proudly. He built me a special desk that grows when I do. Daniel smiled at his daughter's description. Adjustable height furniture. Lily helped design it. As the afternoon progressed, Eva found herself sharing more than she'd intended about her life before the accident, her struggles since, and her complicated relationship with her father. Daniel listened attentively, offering occasional insights without presuming to understand her specific challenges. He means well, Eva sighed, describing her father's approach to her disability. But he treats my paralysis like a failed business venture, something to be fixed with enough money and the right experts. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the hardest thing for a parent is accepting what they can't fix for their child. Is that your professional opinion as a father? Eva asked, her tone gently teasing. As a father who's made plenty of mistakes, Daniel acknowledged. After Sarah died, I tried to protect Lily from all pain. It took time to realize that wasn't my job or even possible. My job was to give her tools to face life's difficulties, not shield her from them. As the conversation continued, Eva noticed Daniel occasionally glancing at her wheelchair with a thoughtful expression. You're analyzing my chair, aren't you? She finally asked, amusement rather than offense in her tone. Daniel looked slightly embarrassed. Professional hazard, I'm sorry. Don't be. What's your assessment? It's a high-end model with good components, but he hesitated. But it wasn't designed for someone exactly like me, Eva finished for him. No mobility aid should cause pain, Daniel stated firmly. A properly fitted chair should feel like an extension of your body, not an imposition on it. As the afternoon light began to fade, Daniel glanced at his watch. We should be going, Lily. We still need to take Mommy's flowers to the cemetery. Lily looked disappointed but nodded, understanding the importance of their ritual. She turned to Eva. Will you be here next year on your birthday? We could celebrate together. The innocent question hung in the air, laden with implications about connection and future possibilities that made both adults momentarily speechless. That's very sweet, Lily, Eva finally replied, careful not to make promises to a child. I'd like that. As they prepared to leave, Daniel hesitated, then pulled a business card from his wallet. It was simple Morris woodworking, with his contact information and a small engraving of a hand plane. If you ever need any adaptations to your living space or furniture, please call. No obligation. Eva accepted the card, turning it over in her fingers. Thank you for the company and the cake. It was unexpectedly nice. Daniel smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. Happy birthday, Eva. Later that night in her room at the Lancaster estate, Eva found herself thinking about Daniel's observations regarding her wheelchair. On impulse, she picked up her phone and took several photos of her chair from different angles, attaching them to an email along with a brief message. You mentioned my chair isn't properly fitted. I'm curious what you'd suggest. No obligation, of course, Eva. She hesitated before pressing send, questioning the impulse. Was it really about the chair, or the unexpected connection with someone who spoke to her as an equal? With a deep breath, she sent the email, telling herself it was merely practical inquiry. Nothing more. 3 days later, Daniel stood in his workshop, carefully measuring the prototype he'd constructed based on Eva's photos. It was a simple attachment for her existing wheelchair, a customized lumbar support, with adjustable armrests that could be installed without permanent modification to the expensive chair. He hadn't planned to build it. After receiving her email, he'd intended to simply reply with suggestions. But something about Eva's situation had resonated with him, activating the problem solver that had helped him survive both war and grief. Lily watched from her workbench, small hands carefully sanding a piece of pine. Is that for the birthday lady, Daddy? Daniel nodded, testing the smoothness of a curve with his fingertips. It is. Her chair's hurting her back, and this might help. Because you help people who hurt, Lily stated with the simple certainty of childhood. Daniel glanced at his daughter, struck by her perception. I try, little bug. The ringing phone interrupted his thoughts. The caller ID showed Lancaster Technologies, causing Daniel's brow to furrow in confusion. He answered with professional composure. Morris Woodworking. Mr. Morris. The voice was crisp, authoritative. This is Richard Lancaster, CEO of Lancaster Technologies. I understand you've done custom work for several of our executives. Daniel's mind raced, connecting dots. Lancaster. Eva's surname was Lancaster. Could it be coincidence? Yes, sir. I've built desks for Mr. Peterson and Mr. Abernathy in your legal department. Excellent. I'm interested in discussing a potential contract. Our medical devices division is developing adaptive furniture, and we need a consultant with practical experience. Your name was mentioned by several people. Daniel listened as Richard Lancaster outlined a proposal that would involve consulting on designs for mobility aids and adaptive furniture, a project that aligned perfectly with Daniel's passion. I'd be interested in discussing this further, Mr. Lancaster, Daniel replied carefully. Good. My assistant will email details for a meeting tomorrow at our headquarters, 9 a.m. sharp. The abruptness of the call's end left Daniel staring at his phone. The opportunity was unexpected and potentially significant. Lancaster Technologies was a major player in medical technology. But the timing so soon after meeting Eva Lancaster raised questions. The Lancaster Technologies headquarters dominated the city skyline, 50 stories of glass and steel reflecting the morning sun. Daniel parked his worn but meticulously maintained truck in the visitor's section, the vehicle a stark contrast to the luxury cars surrounding it. He carried a leather portfolio containing his designs in a small wooden box with the prototype for Eva's wheelchair. Professional attire had replaced his workshop clothes, a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, no tie. Formal enough to show respect, casual enough to remain authentic. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. "Yes, Mr. Morris, Mr. Lancaster is expecting you. Please take the executive elevator to the 50th floor." Richard Lancaster stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the door, hands clasped behind him. He turned as Daniel entered, revealing a man in his early 60s with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating gray eyes that assessed Daniel with clinical precision. "Mr. Morris," he stated rather than greeted, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." Daniel shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip of a man accustomed to dominance. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Lancaster." "Sit." Richard gestured to a seating area featuring sleek leather chairs around a glass table. No wasted words, no small talk. As they settled, Richard Lancaster studied Daniel with unmasked evaluation. "Your reputation is impressive: military background, specialized training in rehabilitation engineering, and hands-on craftsmanship. An unusual combination." Daniel maintained steady eye contact, neither intimidated nor overly familiar. "My military experience informed my approach to design. Function first, aesthetics second, though ideally you achieve both." Richard nodded slightly. "I'll be direct, Mr. Morris. Lancaster Technologies is expanding our adaptive technology division. We've had success with digital and electronic solutions, but lack expertise in practical applications. Your name came up repeatedly when we sought recommendations." "I'm honored," Daniel replied simply. "May I ask what specific applications you're exploring?" "Home mobility solutions primarily. The aging population represents a significant market opportunity, and current offerings are either institutional in appearance or prohibitively expensive." Daniel noted the business-focused framing market opportunity rather than human need, but recognized it as the language of corporate strategy rather than callousness. "I brought some examples of my approach." Daniel offered, opening his portfolio to display detailed drawings and photographs of previous projects. Each piece is designed for a specific individual, but the principles can be applied broadly. Richard examined the materials with analytical interest. "Impressive craftsmanship, but can these designs be mass-produced cost-effectively?" "With modifications, yes. The core ergonomic principles remain consistent even when materials or production methods change." The conversation continued, focusing on technical details and potential applications. Throughout the discussion, Daniel searched for any indication that Richard knew about his meeting with Eva. The CEO gave nothing away, maintaining focused professionalism. After nearly an hour, Richard stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. "Your expertise aligns with our needs, Mr. Morris. I'd like to propose a 6-month consulting contract to start. You would work directly with our design team 2 days per week with additional compensation for prototype development." He named a figure that momentarily took Daniel aback, substantially more than he typically earned in 3 months of woodworking. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Lancaster." "It's a business decision," Richard corrected, any hint of generosity dismissed. "We're paying for specialized knowledge that will give us a competitive advantage. Margaret will send the contract details today. I expect an answer within 48 hours. Daniel nodded, gathering his materials. As he prepared to leave, he made a decision. The wooden box containing Eva's wheelchair attachment remained on the table. "Before I go, Mr. Lancaster, I'd like to show you something I've been working on." Daniel opened the box, revealing the carefully crafted wooden components. This is a custom lumbar support and armrest modification designed for a specific wheelchair user who experiences pain with extended sitting. Richard's expression remained impassive as he examined the piece. "The craftsmanship is excellent, but what makes this superior to existing solutions? It addresses the individual's specific proportions and pressure points," Daniel explained, demonstrating the adjustability. "Most mass-produced supports take a one-size-fits-most approach, which often creates new problems while solving others." Richard nodded, professional interest evident. "This aligns with the personalization approach we're considering. Include this concept in your initial presentation to the design team." As Daniel stood to leave, a framed photograph on a side table caught his attention. Eva, in what appeared to be a graduation gown, standing between Richard and a woman with a striking resemblance to Eva. Before the accident, based on Eva's posture, the confirmation of their relationship was now undeniable. Richard followed his gaze, his expression changing subtly, a momentary softening before the professional mask returned. My daughter Eva, he stated simply, before the accident. Daniel nodded, maintaining neutral professionalism despite the racing of his thoughts. She has your eyes. Something flashed across Richard's face, surprise, perhaps at the personal observation. Her mother's, actually. The moment passed quickly, and Richard escorted Daniel to the door with brisk efficiency. I look forward to your decision, Mr. Morris. The following Saturday, Daniel was working in his shop when the bell above the door chimed, signaling a visitor. He looked up, expecting a client, only to find Richard Lancaster standing in the entrance, observing the space with analytical interest. Mr. Lancaster, Daniel acknowledged, setting aside his tools and wiping his hands on his apron. This is unexpected. Richard nodded, moving further into the workshop with measured steps. I prefer to see things firsthand. Your consulting work has impressed my team. I wanted to understand where it comes from. Daniel gestured toward the space. Feel free to look around. Richard moved through the workshop, methodically examining completed pieces and works in progress with the eye of someone who appreciated craftsmanship without necessarily understanding its creation. He paused before the specialized chair Daniel had been building for the veteran with back injuries. Lancaster Technologies could mass-produce designs like these, he observed. Reach thousands instead of dozens. Different purposes, Daniel replied, joining him beside the chair. Mass production serves breadth. This serves depth, one person's specific needs precisely met. Richard considered this distinction, running his hand along the chair's arm. Both have value. Yes, Daniel agreed, surprised by the concession. They do? Richard turned to face him directly. I spoke with Eva last night. She was quite adamant about your character. Daniel maintained a neutral expression, despite his surprise that Eva and her father had discussed him. Eva forms her own opinions. Indeed, Richard's gaze was evaluating but less hostile than expected. She mentioned you refused payment for modifications to her wheelchair. Why? The question seemed to carry weight beyond simple curiosity. Daniel considered his answer carefully. Some things we do for livelihood, others we do because they matter. He met Richard's gaze steadily. Helping Eva be more comfortable mattered. Richard's expression remained unreadable, but something shifted in his eyes, a reassessment, perhaps, or the beginning of one. Eva has invited you to our home for dinner next Friday, he stated rather than asked. I've agreed to be present. Daniel understood the significance of this development, not quite approval, but a willingness to observe firsthand. I look forward to it. 8 o'clock, Richard confirmed, moving toward the door. Don't be late. As Richard departed, the invitation hung in the air like both opportunity and challenge. A chance to demonstrate directly to Richard Lancaster that his interest in Eva was genuine, his character sound. Daniel returned to his work, hands steady as they shaped wood with practiced precision. First Eva, now this evolving dynamic with her father, both intersecting with his professional opportunity at Lancaster Technologies. The path forward was uncertain, but the direction felt right. For now, that was enough. The Lancaster estate stood like a modernist fortress on the city's outskirts, glass, steel, and limestone arranged in clean lines that spoke of wealth without ostentation. Daniel navigated his truck up the winding driveway, acutely aware of how out of place the reliable old vehicle looked against this backdrop of calculated perfection. He checked his watch, 7:52 p.m. Early, but not excessively so. In the military, he'd learned that punctuality meant arriving with enough time to assess a situation, but not so early as to inconvenience others. 8 minutes felt right. The front door opened before he could ring the bell. A uniformed housekeeper greeted him with professional courtesy, taking his coat and leading him through the vast entryway. Daniel's carpenter's eye couldn't help but notice the impeccable joinery of the woodwork, the precision of every angle, the perfect balance of form and function throughout the space. Mr. Morris, Richard Lancaster's voice came from the entrance to what appeared to be a formal living room. He stood with the straight-back posture of a man accustomed to command, dressed in what was likely a casual outfit by his standards, tailored slacks and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly mortgage. Mr. Lancaster, Daniel replied, extending his hand. The handshake was firm, evaluative on both sides. Thank you for having me. Eva will be joining us shortly, Richard stated, gesturing toward a seating area where crystal decanters stood on a side table. Scotch. Please. Daniel nodded, accepting the social protocol despite rarely drinking. One glass nursed slowly would be his limit, a habit formed during his military years when clear judgment mattered more than social lubrication. Richard poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into heavy crystal tumblers, the familiar movements of a man who performed this ritual often. 18 years old, he commented, handing one to Daniel. I find the older vintages too peaty. Daniel accepted the glass, recognizing the statement as both information and a subtle test of his knowledge. The younger ones maintain a better balance between smoke and caramel. He agreed, taking a small sip and appreciating the complex flavors despite his usual preference for simpler drinks. Richard's eyebrow raised slightly, approval perhaps, or simply acknowledgement that Daniel had passed some minor evaluation. He gestured toward one of the leather armchairs, taking a seat in its twin opposite. Your contract was processed yesterday, Richard stated without preamble. The design team is eager to begin consultations next week. I'm looking forward to it, Daniel replied. The prototype concepts I've seen show promising technical innovation. Technical innovation is what Lancaster Technologies excels at, Richard agreed. What we lack is the human element, the bridge between engineering excellence and practical usability. He studied Daniel over the rim of his glass. That's where you come in. Before Daniel could respond, the subtle whir of an electric wheelchair announced Eva's arrival. She entered the room with a grace that somehow transcended her seated position, wearing a deep blue dress that complemented her dark hair, which was pulled back in a simple but elegant style. Her face brightened visibly when she saw Daniel, a transformation so striking that Daniel wondered if Richard had noticed the change. Daniel, you found us without trouble. Your directions were excellent, Daniel replied, standing as she approached. He was struck again by how her natural beauty seemed at odds with the guardedness in her eyes, except when she smiled as she was now, and the wariness temporarily retreated. The modifications to my chair have made an extraordinary difference, she told him, positioning herself in the open space between the armchairs. I've had no back pain at all since you installed them. I'm glad to hear it, Daniel replied simply. Sometimes the smallest adjustments make the biggest difference. Richard watched this exchange with the analytical attention of a scientist observing an experiment. Eva tells me you refused payment for your work on her chair. He commented, the statement carrying the weight of a question. As I mentioned at the workshop, some things we do because they matter, Daniel answered, meeting Richard's evaluative gaze directly. Not everything needs to be a financial transaction. An unusual philosophy in today's world, Richard observed, swirling the scotch in his glass. Most people are quick to capitalize on any opportunity. Most people haven't seen what really matters the way Daniel has. Eva interjected, a protective edge in her voice that surprised both men. There's more to value than what can be listed on a balance sheet. Richard's expression tightened momentarily, not anger exactly, but the discomfort of a man unused to being challenged, especially by his daughter. Perhaps, he conceded after a moment, though survival in this world generally requires practical considerations. Dinner is served, Mr. Lancaster, the housekeeper announced from the doorway, providing a timely transition from the increasingly tense conversation. The dining room continued the theme of understated opulence. A table that could comfortably seat 16 set intimately for 3 at one end, fine china and crystal, catching the light from a modernist chandelier overhead. Daniel noted how the space had been subtly modified to accommodate Eva's wheelchair, slightly wider, spacing between chairs, the table height carefully calibrated. Attention to detail that spoke of care, whatever other complications existed in the Lancaster family dynamic. As they settled at the table, Richard at the head with Eva and Daniel on either side, Daniel couldn't help but notice how the positioning created a subtle power dynamic. Richard presiding, Daniel and Eva as supplicants of sorts. Whether intentional or habitual, it revealed something about how Richard viewed his role in any situation. The meal began with a chilled soup served by the efficient household staff, who seemed to materialize and disappear with practiced invisibility. The conversation remained initially on safe topics: the unseasonably warm weather, an upcoming exhibit at the city's art museum, Daniel's initial impressions of the Lancaster Technologies facilities. It was during the main course, perfectly cooked beef tenderloin with seasonal vegetables, that Richard steered the conversation toward more substantive waters. Eva mentioned you served 2 tours overseas, he said, cutting his meat with surgical precision. Special forces, I understand. Daniel nodded, neither proud nor ashamed of his military background. Yes, 8 years total service. What made you transition to woodworking? Richard asked. Seems an unusual shift from military service. Daniel considered his answer carefully, aware that Eva was watching him with genuine curiosity. I came from a family of builders. My grandfather was a master carpenter, taught me the basics growing up. After my discharge, I needed something Grounding. Working with wood provided that stability. Stability is valuable, Richard acknowledged, but surely your military skills would have been highly marketable in private security or defense contracting. The financial opportunities would have been substantial. Daniel set down his fork, giving the question the consideration it deserved. There's satisfaction in creating something that will outlast you, he finally said. In the military, I was part of necessary destruction. I wanted my civilian life to be about building something worthwhile. Eva's eyes reflected something that might have been admiration, while Richard's analytical gaze seemed to be cataloging Daniel's response against some internal framework. An admirable sentiment, Richard finally said, though I imagine supporting a child on a craftsman's income presents challenges. Dad? Eva interjected, her tone carrying a warning. It's a fair question, Daniel assured her before addressing Richard directly. I live within my means. Lily has everything she needs, if not everything society tells her she should want. The workshop provides a comfortable living. And now your consulting position with Lancaster Technologies will supplement that, Richard observed. The position aligns with my values, Daniel replied evenly. Creating mobility solutions that help people live with dignity and independence. The compensation is generous but secondary to the purpose. Richard's expression suggested skepticism, but he merely nodded and turned the conversation toward Eva's recent volunteer work with the children's art program. Daniel noticed how her face animated when discussing the online sessions she conducted with hospitalized children, teaching them art appreciation and simple techniques they could manage even from hospital beds. I'm developing a proposal for an expanded program, she explained, genuine passion in her voice, using art therapy approaches specifically designed for children with limited mobility or chronic pain. The research shows significant benefits for both psychological well-being and pain management. That sounds meaningful, Daniel commented, struck by the parallel to his own work, creating tools for expression rather than just distraction. Eva's smile held surprised pleasure at his understanding. Exactly, most programs treat art as merely a way to pass time, but it can be so much more, a language for expressing what can't be articulated, especially for children. Have you secured funding for this expansion? Daniel asked. A shadow crossed Eva's face. Not yet. The foundation that supports the current program is hesitant to increase their commitment without proven outcomes. Which is entirely reasonable, Richard interjected. Resources are finite. Allocation requires demonstration of results. These children aren't quarterly reports, Dad, Eva replied, frustration evident in her voice. Their well-being can't be reduced to metrics and ROI calculations. All worthwhile endeavors require sustainable models. Richard countered, his tone suggesting this was a long-standing disagreement. Sentiment doesn't pay for programming or materials. Daniel observed the familiar pattern of their interaction. Eva's passion meeting Richard's pragmatism, neither quite hearing the other's underlying concerns. The dynamic reminded him of discussions with military strategists who saw only objectives, while field operators saw the human realities on the ground. Perhaps there's middle ground, Daniel suggested carefully. Meaningful metrics that capture real impact without reducing the children to statistics. In the military, we learned that both the mission parameters and the human elements mattered. Ignoring either led to failure. Both Lancasters looked at him with surprise, as if they'd momentarily forgotten his presence in the heat of their familiar argument. Eva recovered first, a thoughtful expression replacing her frustration. That makes sense, she acknowledged. I've been resistant to metrics because they often miss what matters most, but designing better measurements rather than rejecting them entirely. That might work. Richard studied Daniel with renewed interest. A pragmatic approach, he conceded. Eva has always been resistant to quantifying outcomes, while I perhaps focus too exclusively on measurable results. It was the first time Daniel had heard Richard acknowledge any limitation in his perspective, and the concession seemed to surprise Eva as much as it did Daniel. The conversation shifted to safer topics as dessert was served, a delicate lemon tart that Eva mentioned was her mother's favorite recipe. Daniel noticed how Richard's expression softened at the mention of his late wife, a brief glimpse of the man behind the CEO facade. Eleanor, its sweet memories, still makes it exactly as Catherine taught her. Richard remarked, his tone gentler than Daniel had yet heard from him. 25 years of friendship preserved in a recipe. Mom would have loved knowing her legacy lives on in lemon zest and butter. Eva smiled, the shared memory momentarily bridging the gap between father and daughter. As coffee was served in the living room following dinner, Daniel found himself seated beside Eva, while Richard excused himself briefly to take what he described as an unavoidable call from Tokyo. "I apologize for my father's interrogation techniques," Iva said once they were alone, her tone lightly ironic but with genuine concern beneath. "He approaches personal relationships like hostile takeovers." Daniel smiled. "I've faced tougher questioning from drill sergeants, and they didn't serve 18-year-old scotch." Eva laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. "You handled him well. Most people either cower or overcompensate with bravado. You just stayed yourself." "The benefit of age and experience," Daniel replied. "You learn what battles matter and what's just noise." Eva studied him with curious intensity. "You don't fit any of the categories he's trying to place you in. It's confusing him." "What categories are those?" "Fortune hunter, social climber, charity case, potential business advantage." Eva ticked off the possibilities with blunt candor. "He's trying to determine your angle. And if there isn't one," Eva's expression turned serious, "then you'd be the first person in a very long time to approach either of us without an agenda." The vulnerability beneath her matter-of-fact tone touched something in Daniel. Before he could respond, Richard returned his CEO mask firmly back in place. "My apologies," he said briskly. "Manufacturing issues in our Tokyo facility. Nothing that can't be resolved, but timing is critical with the Asian markets opening in a few hours." The rest of the evening proceeded pleasantly enough, though Daniel sensed Richard's continued evaluation behind every question and observation. When Daniel mentioned it was time for him to leave, Lily was with a sitter who needed to get home. Richard nodded with what seemed like approval at this evidence of parental responsibility. "I'll walk you out," Eva offered, maneuvering her wheelchair toward the hallway. Richard extended his hand to Daniel. "Thank you for coming. I look forward to seeing the results of your collaboration with our design team." Daniel read the subtext clearly. Richard was compartmentalizing, keeping Daniel's professional role distinct from whatever personal connection might be developing with Eva. "The collaboration looks promising," Daniel replied, matching Richard's professional tone while maintaining steady eye contact. "Thank you for your hospitality." Eva led him through the sprawling house to a side entrance where his truck was visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. When they reached the door, she turned to face him, a mix of emotions playing across her features. "I'd apologize again for my father, but that would imply I expect him to change," she said with a rueful smile. "No apologies needed," Daniel assured her. "He's protective of you. That's natural." "It's not protection," Eva corrected gently. "It's control. There's a difference." Daniel nodded, acknowledging the distinction. "The line gets blurry sometimes, especially for parents. After Sarah died, I was so afraid of losing Lily too that I nearly smothered her with protection. Took time to learn the difference between keeping her safe and keeping her from living." Eva's eyes softened. "You learn, though. That's what matters." "We all learn at different rates." Daniel observed his tone, suggesting he included Richard in this assessment. "Some never learn at all," Eva countered, but without bitterness, simple observation. Daniel hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Would you like to bring Lily to the children's art program sometime? She's been asking about you, and she loves drawing. Might be good for her to see how art can help kids who are facing challenges." Eva's face brightened visibly. "I'd love that. The next session is Tuesday afternoon at 4. Would that work with your schedule?" "Perfect. I finish at Lancaster Technologies at 3 that day." Daniel smiled, realizing how quickly their lives were beginning to intertwine in small but meaningful ways. As he drove home through the quiet streets, Daniel reflected on the evening. Richard Lancaster remained a complex figure, clearly devoted to his daughter in his way, yet seemingly unable to see her fully as an independent adult with her own path. The consulting opportunity with Lancaster Technologies was genuinely exciting, aligning with Daniel's passion for creating mobility solutions that enhance dignity and independence. And then there was Eva herself, brilliant, resilient, caught between her physical limitations and her father's controlling nature, yet maintaining her compassion and spirit. Daniel found himself increasingly drawn to her complexity, her strength, her subtle humor. When he arrived home, paid the sitter, and checked on Lily, sound asleep, her small hand curled around the wooden fox he'd carved for her. Daniel acknowledged to himself that what had begun as a chance encounter was becoming something he hadn't expected to find again after Sarah's death. Something both exhilarating and terrifying in its fragile potential. 2 weeks into his consulting position at Lancaster Technologies, Daniel found himself fully immersed in the mobility division's projects. The engineering team had initially viewed him with the skepticism technical experts often reserve for practical consultants, but his detailed knowledge of biomechanics, learned through his military training and refined through years of custom furniture design, had quickly earned their respect. Today's meeting focused on the prototype for an adjustable home chair designed for seniors with mobility challenges. The team had gathered in the development lab, where multiple iterations of the chair stood in various stages of completion. The hydraulic lift mechanism is innovative, Daniel acknowledged, examining the latest version, but the control placement requires users to reach behind their back, impossible for anyone with shoulder or rotational limitations. Dr. Chen, the lead engineer, frowned slightly. The placement was necessary for the hydraulic configuration. Then the hydraulic configuration needs to be reconsidered, Daniel stated firmly but respectfully. The best technology is worthless if the user can't access it comfortably. The design team exchanged glances, some surprised, others intrigued by this direct challenge to their approach. Daniel unrolled his sketches on the conference table. If we relocate the control mechanism here, he indicated a position along the side of the seat, and modify the hydraulic lines to curve rather than angle, we maintain functionality while dramatically improving usability. Dr. Chen leaned forward, examining the proposed modification with professional interest. The manufacturing complexity would increase. Initially, yes, Daniel conceded, but user adoption and satisfaction would increase proportionally, justifying the additional production cost. The discussion continued for nearly an hour, with Daniel maintaining a balance between respecting the team's technical expertise and advocating for the human experience. By the session's end, the engineers were incorporating several of his suggestions into a revised prototype, and Dr. Chen had invited Daniel to participate in the next round of user testing. As the team dispersed, Daniel noticed Richard Lancaster standing in the doorway, observing with his characteristic analytical attention. How long he had been there was impossible to determine. "Mr. Morris," Richard acknowledged, approaching as the last engineer exited, "you've made quite an impression on our development team. Dr. Chen is not easily persuaded to modify his designs." "He's brilliant," Daniel replied sincerely. "All of them are. They just need to remember they're designing for humans with limitations, not idealized users." Richard nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Walk with me. There's something I'd like to show you." They moved through the facility to a secure area that required Richard's biometric identification to access. The door opened to reveal a laboratory unlike the others. Daniel had seen more advanced equipment, fewer staff, and a general atmosphere of heightened confidentiality. "This is our Advanced Development Division," Richard explained as they entered. "What you see here doesn't leave this room understood." "Of course," Daniel agreed, professional discretion being second nature after his military service. In the center of the lab stood what appeared to be an exoskeleton system mounted on a testing platform. Unlike the bulky military and industrial versions Daniel was familiar with, this one was streamlined, almost elegant in its design. "The Autonomy Series," Richard stated with understated pride, "our next-generation mobility assistance system, lightweight carbon fiber frame, neural response integration, and adaptive positioning." Daniel circled the prototype, his trained eye assessing the engineering and ergonomic elements. The design was remarkable, clearly the product of world-class innovation and substantial investment. "This could be life-changing for people with partial mobility limitations," he observed, noting the system's potential applications. "Particularly degenerative conditions where maintaining muscle tone and circulation is critical." Richard nodded, pleased by Daniel's immediate grasp of the system's potential. "Precisely. We're not looking to replace wheelchairs for those with complete paralysis. This is for the millions with partial mobility challenges, MS patients, elderly individuals with deteriorating strength rehabilitation cases." Daniel continued his examination, noting both the impressive innovations and the concerning limitations. "The shoulder articulation needs refinement," he observed, pointing to a specific junction. "Current configuration would cause fatigue and potential impingement with extended use." Rather than defensiveness, Richard showed interest in Daniel's assessment. "That's been a challenge point in our testing. What would you suggest?" For the next 20 minutes, they discussed potential modifications with Daniel, sketching quick revisions that might address the ergonomic issues without compromising the system's technical functionality. Richard asked pointed questions, demonstrating a deeper technical understanding than Daniel had previously witnessed from him. "Your perspective is valuable," Richard finally acknowledged. "I'd like you to work directly with this team 1 day per week in addition to your current consulting responsibilities. with appropriate compensation adjustments, of course. I'd be honored, Daniel replied, genuinely excited by the opportunity to contribute to such groundbreaking technology. Though I'll need to maintain my 3 days at my workshop. I have existing client commitments I can't abandon. Richard's expression suggested he found such constraints unusual executives in his world likely rearrange their entire lives for opportunities of this magnitude, but he nodded acceptance. Arranged. Dr. Patel leads this division. She'll brief you on the project parameters next week. As they exited the secure lab, Richard's demeanor shifted subtly from collaborative to evaluative. You've seen Eva several times since our dinner, I understand. The abrupt change of subject caught Daniel off guard, though he maintained his composure. Yes, she's been helping Lily with art projects, and I took them both to the children's art program Eva volunteers with. I see. Richard's tone revealed nothing of his thoughts on these developments. And how is your daughter responding to these activities? Daniel recognized the real question. Beneath the surface, was Lily becoming attached to Eva? And by extension, was this relationship becoming something more significant than casual friendship? Lily enjoys Eva's company, Daniel answered honestly. She's had limited female influence since her mother died, so it's been positive for her to spend time with someone who shares her interest in art. Richard nodded, his expression unreadable. Eva mentioned you're building a specialized art table for her program. Pro bono work again. The foundation is covering materials cost, Daniel replied evenly. My time is donated. It's a worthwhile program. They reached Richard's office, where he paused before entering. Your generosity is commendable, Mr. Morris. I hope it's sustainable. The comment carried multiple layers of meaning, none of them lost on Daniel. I've found that giving where it matters tends to create its own kind of sustainability, he responded, maintaining direct eye contact. Something like respect flickered across Richard's features, though his overall expression remained guarded. We'll speak next week about the autonomy project, he said, effectively ending the conversation by stepping into his office. Daniel made his way back to the elevator, reflecting on the complex dynamic developing with Richard Lancaster. The man clearly valued Daniel's professional contributions while remaining suspicious of his personal connection with Eva. The protective father and the strategic CEO seemed in constant tension, neither fully trusting Daniel's motives, despite growing evidence of his integrity. As the elevator descended, Daniel's phone vibrated with a text message from Eva. Art table is a huge hit with the kids. One boy spinal injury, limited hand function, created his first complete drawing today using your adaptive brush holders. His mother cried, thank you. A smile spread across Daniel's face as he read the message. This tangible impact on individual lives was why he did what he did. All the corporate politics and strategic positioning in the world couldn't match the simple joy of knowing a child had found new means of expression because of something he'd created. He typed his reply, design is just potential. You're the one making it matter. Glad it's helping. The doors opened to the lobby and Daniel headed toward the parking garage, his mind already working on refinements to the brush holders based on what he'd learned from the autonomy prototype. Every project informed every other project when you understood that the fundamental goal was always the same, helping people move through the world with dignity and independence. Daddy, watch me, Lily called, her voice echoing across the community pool where Daniel had brought her for her weekly swimming lesson. She executed a somewhat wobbly but enthusiastic dive from the low board, surfacing with a triumphant grin. Did you see I didn't bend my knees this time? Perfect form, little bug, Daniel called back from his position at the edge of the pool. Your coach would be proud. Lily beamed at the praise, then returned to practicing with the other children in her class. Daniel settled back in his chair, enjoying the simple pleasure of watching his daughter's confidence grow with each new skill mastered. She's a natural athlete, a familiar voice observed from beside him. Daniel turned to find Eva maneuvering her wheelchair into the space next to his chair. She wore a casual sundress that complemented her dark hair, which was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Eva, he greeted her with surprised pleasure. I didn't expect to see you here. She smiled, her eyes tracking Lily's movements in the pool. I volunteer with the adaptive swimming program on Saturdays. We work with children who have mobility challenges. She gestured toward the far end of the pool, where several children with various assistive devices were working with specialized instructors. That's wonderful, Daniel said, genuinely impressed. Swimming provides such freedom of movement. Eva nodded, a distant look crossing her features. It's the only time some of these kids feel weightless, unencumbered by their devices or limitations. For me too, actually. Daniel glanced at her with new understanding. You swim 3 times a week, she confirmed. It's the best physical therapy, and for an hour I move differently than I do on land. It's liberating. The simple admission revealed something important. Eva viewed her wheelchair not as her identity, but as a tool, one aspect of a life that included many forms of movement and expression. It reinforced what Daniel had observed consistently, her refusal to be defined by her limitations. Lily's been asking about joining your art program regularly. Daniel mentioned watching his daughter practice her backstroke. She can't stop talking about the projects you've been doing with the kids. Eva's face brightened. She'd be a wonderful addition. Her energy is contagious, and she has real talent. She hesitated, then added, but I should mention my father is the primary funder of the program. He might be present occasionally for the foundation's documentation needs. Daniel understood the implicit warning Richard would be monitoring their interactions directly or indirectly. Transparency is always best, he replied simply. I have nothing to hide from your father. Eva studied him for a moment, then nodded. I know that. I'm not sure he does. They watched the children swimming in companionable silence for a few minutes before Eva spoke again. He mentioned you are working on the autonomy project now. Daniel nodded, careful not to reveal any confidential details. It's remarkable technology. Could help a lot of people. It was my mother's initiative originally, Eva said quietly. She had early onset MS. The initial research funding came from her family trust earmarked specifically for mobility assistance that maintained dignity. This new information shifted Daniel's understanding of Richard's dedication to the project. I didn't realize. That makes it even more meaningful. For my father, it's both business and personal, Eva explained. After she died, he channeled his grief into expanding the research exponentially. The division's success is his tribute to her. Daniel recognized the pattern, the same one he'd followed after Sarah's death, pouring himself into creating a stable world for Lily, using his craft as both distraction and purpose. Grief finds its expression in different ways, he observed. Some build companies, some build furniture. Eva's glance held appreciation for his understanding. Some build walls, she added softly, and Daniel knew she was referring to her father's emotional barriers. Before their conversation could continue, Lily emerged from the pool water, streaming from her small form, as she ran toward them despite the lifeguard's warning call of no running. Miss Eva, she exclaimed, delight evident in her voice. You came to see me swim. I did, Eva confirmed with a warm smile. That was an excellent dive. Lily beamed at the praise, then noticed Eva's professional lanyard and ID badge. Are you a swimming teacher too? I help with special swimming lessons, Eva explained, gesturing toward the adaptive program. For children who need extra assistance in the water. Lily's eyes widened with interest. Like how you help kids make art even when their hands don't work right. Exactly like that. Eva nodded, impressed by the child's immediate understanding. Can I see, Lily asked, looking between Eva and her father for permission. Daniel checked his watch. Your lesson is finished, so it's fine with me if Eva doesn't mind. I'd be happy to introduce you, Eva offered. We have about 20 minutes before the session ends. They made their way to the adaptive swimming area where children with various mobility challenges were engaged in specialized aquatic therapy. Daniel watched as Eva introduced Lily to the instructors and participants, noting the natural way she interacted with both the children and the staff. No condescension, no excessive praise, just genuine engagement and respect. Lily observed with unusual attentiveness for a 6-year-old, asking thoughtful questions about the equipment and techniques. When one boy struggled to grasp a floating device, she spontaneously demonstrated the whole technique she just learned in her own lesson, adapting it slightly to accommodate his limited grip strength. She has good instincts, Eva remarked quietly to Daniel as they watched. Natural empathy without pity. She gets that from her mother, Daniel replied, pride evident in his voice. Sarah was a kindergarten teacher, had a gift for meeting children exactly where they were without making them feel different or special, just seen. Eva's expression softened at this glimpse into Sarah's character. She must have been remarkable. She was, Daniel confirmed, simply the words carrying the weight of all he couldn't articulate about his late wife. Her laughter, her patience, the way she'd made their small house feel like the center of the universe. As the adaptive session concluded, Lily rejoined them, her expression thoughtful. Daddy, can I be a helper in Miss Eva's swim class? Coach Mike says I'm a good enough swimmer now. Daniel glanced at Eva, raising an eyebrow in question. We do have a junior assistant program, Eva confirmed. Children 8 and older can help after completing water safety training. I'm almost 7, Lily countered with the logic of childhood where 18 months represented an eternity. Daniel smiled, recognizing the determination in his daughter's expression, the same look she got when tackling a difficult new skill in the workshop. Tell you what, little bug, you keep practicing, and when you're 8, we'll revisit the question. In the meantime, maybe you can continue helping with the art program. This compromise satisfied Lily, who nodded seriously before announcing she needed to change out of her wet swimsuit. I'll take her to the locker room, Daniel said, rising from his chair. Would you like to join us for lunch afterward? Nothing fancy, just the sandwich shop across the street. Eva hesitated, and Daniel immediately added, no pressure, I'm sure you have other commitments. Actually, I'd love to, Eva interrupted with a smile. Let me check in with the program coordinator first. I'll meet you in the lobby in 15 minutes. As Daniel helped Lily change and dry her hair, he found himself looking forward to lunch with an anticipation that both pleased and unsettled him. It had been 5 years since Sarah's death, and while he'd had occasional coffee or dinner with women his friends had introduced him to, nothing had progressed beyond polite conversation and mutual recognition that the timing or chemistry wasn't right. With Eva, the connection felt different, built on shared values and complementary perspectives rather than romantic intention. Yet he couldn't deny the growing warmth he felt in her presence, the way their conversations flowed naturally between serious topics and easy humor, the mutual respect that formed the foundation of their evolving relationship. The complexity was undeniable. Her father was now his client and potentially his professional advocate. Her physical condition required considerations that would shape any deepening relationship, and his responsibility to Lily remained his paramount concern. Yet as they settled at a table in the bustling sandwich shop, Lily chattering happily about her swimming achievements, while Eva listened with genuine interest, Daniel found himself considering possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to contemplate since becoming a widower. Daddy, can Miss Eva come to my school play? Lily asked, suddenly interrupting his thoughts. She could help me practice my lines. Daniel glanced at Eva, noting the surprise and pleasure in her expression. That's a big ask, little bug. Miss Eva has her own busy schedule. What's the play? Eva asked, directing the question to Lily rather than Daniel. The enormous turnip, Lily announced proudly. I'm the turnip. I have to stand very still while everyone tries to pull me out of the ground, and then at the end, I pop out and everyone falls down. Eva laughed, the sound warm and genuine. That sounds like a very important role. When is it? 2 weeks from Thursday, Lily replied promptly. Daddy's helping make the costumes because Mrs. Peterson can't sew very good. Very well, Daniel corrected automatically, the parent's reflexive grammar adjustment. If your dad doesn't mind, I'd be happy to come, Eva told Lily, glancing at Daniel for confirmation. We'd both like that, Daniel replied, the simple statement carrying more significance than its surface meaning might suggest. As their lunch continued, the conversation flowed easily between Lily's school adventures, Eva's art program developments, and Daniel's latest woodworking projects. To any observer, they might have appeared to be a family enjoying a weekend meal together, a thought that both comforted and startled Daniel when it crossed his mind. Later, as they were preparing to leave, Eva received a phone call that transformed her expression from relaxed enjoyment to tense concern in seconds. Yes, I understand. Which hospital? I'll be there right away, she said into the phone, her voice tight with controlled worry. What's wrong? Daniel asked as she ended the call. One of my art program students, Max, the boy with the spinal injury I mentioned, he's been rushed to the hospital with pneumonia complications. His mother is asking for me. Eva's fingers moved rapidly over her phone, presumably ordering transportation. Let me drive you, Daniel offered immediately. It will be faster than waiting for a service. Eva looked up, her expression conflicted. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition, Daniel stated firmly. Lily and I can drop you off and pick you up later, or wait if that's more helpful. The relief in Eva's eyes was answer enough. Thank you. Memorial Hospital Pediatric Intensive Care. The drive to the hospital was quiet, Lily sensing the gravity of the situation and remaining uncharacteristically silent in the back seat. Daniel navigated efficiently through weekend traffic while Eva made several calls to the program director, to her father's assistant, to reschedule a dinner commitment, and finally to Max's mother for an update. When they arrived at the hospital, Daniel pulled up to the entrance. Text me when you know more. We'll be nearby whenever you need a ride home. Eva reached over and squeezed his hand briefly, the gesture conveying what words couldn't in the moment. Thank you, Daniel. This means more than I can say. As she maneuvered her wheelchair out of the truck and toward the hospital entrance, Daniel was struck by her focused determination, all personal concerns set aside to support a child and family in crisis. It was another facet of her character revealed steady presence in emergency, prioritizing others' needs above her own comfort. "Is Max going to be okay, Daddy?" Lily asked from the back seat as they pulled away. "I hope so, little bug," Daniel replied honestly. "He's in the right place to get help." "Miss Eva will make him feel better," Lily stated with absolute certainty. "She knows how to talk to kids who are scared." Daniel glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror, struck by her perceptiveness. "Yes, she does," he agreed softly. They spent the afternoon at a nearby park, Lily playing on the equipment, while Daniel sat on a bench, his phone close at hand. Around dinner time, he received a text from Eva. "Max stabilized. Staying with family for moral support. Don't wait for me, I'll get a service home later. Thank you for understanding." Daniel replied immediately. "Glad he's stable. Text when you're ready to leave. We'll be having dinner at Rosie's Diner nearby. No rush, we're fine." 3 hours later, as Daniel and Lily were sharing a piece of apple pie at the diner, Eva texted again. "Doctor's allowing me to leave now. Are you still nearby?" "Yes, we'll pick you up in 10 minutes. Daniel responded, signaling for the check. When they arrived at the hospital, Eva was waiting at the entrance, her face showing the strain of emotional support, but with relief evident in her posture. She maneuvered her wheelchair into the truck with practiced efficiency, accepting Daniel's minimal assistance only where necessary. "How's Max?" Daniel asked as they pulled away from the hospital. "Responding well to antibiotics," Eva replied, exhaustion evident in her voice. "The crisis has passed, but they'll keep him for observation for at least 2 days. His immune system is compromised from the spinal injury, so infections hit him particularly hard. You made a difference by being there," Daniel observed, noting how she had instinctively reached back to pat Lily's knee when the child welcomed her back to the truck. Eva shook her head slightly. "I just sat with his mother while she waited for news." "Anyone could have done that. But not anyone did," Daniel pointed out quietly. "You did." Their eyes met briefly in the darkened truck, understanding passing between them. Sometimes the most important thing was simply showing up, being present in the difficult moments, a truth they both recognized from their different experiences of loss and challenge. When they reached Eva's address, a surprising revelation, as Daniel had assumed she lived at the Lancaster estate, he discovered she maintained her own apartment in a luxury building downtown, one with extensive accessibility modifications. "My Declaration of Independence," she explained with a small smile when she saw his expression. "Dad wasn't thrilled, but he eventually accepted that I needed my own space." "Would you like me to see you up?" Daniel offered, aware of her evident fatigue. "Thank you, but I'm fine," Eva assured him. "The building staff are excellent, and I just need to crash for about 12 hours. Daniel nodded, respecting her self-sufficiency. "Call if you need anything, anytime." Eva's expression softened. "Today meant a lot, Daniel. Not many people would rearrange their entire day to drive a friend to a hospital and wait hours for pickup. That's what friends do." Daniel replied simply, though both recognized that the word friends barely contained the connection developing between them. As Eva said goodnight to Lily and wheeled herself toward the building entrance, Daniel found himself thinking about the day's events, the casual pleasure of their lunch together, the instinctive teamwork in responding to the emergency, the natural way they had moved through the day's unexpected developments. It felt like a glimpse into possibilities, into a life where their separate strengths created something stronger together. He drove home with Lily falling asleep in the back seat, the events of the day settling into his consciousness. Something was shifting between him and Eva, something significant enough that they would both need to acknowledge it soon, with all its complexities and potential challenges. For now, though, he would focus on getting his daughter home and into bed, on the tangible responsibilities that anchored his life. The rest would unfold as it should, one careful step at a time. The following Tuesday, Daniel arrived at Lancaster Technologies for his regular consulting session with the design team. The morning proceeded normally with productive discussions about the shoulder articulation modifications for the autonomy prototype. After lunch, he was summoned to Richard Lancaster's office, an unusual occurrence, as their interactions typically took place in the development labs or conference rooms. Margaret, Richard's executive assistant, ushered him in with her usual professional courtesy. "Mr. Morris, please have a seat. Mr. Lancaster will be with you shortly." Daniel settled into one of the visitor chairs, noting that Richard's office reflected the same aesthetic as his home, minimalist, expensive, with carefully selected art pieces that revealed more sophistication than personal connection. The only exceptions were the photographs of Eva and her mother displayed on a side table positioned where Richard could see them from his desk. The door opened and Richard entered with another man, younger, expensively dressed in a tailored suit that conveyed both wealth and careful attention to appearance. Something about his confident smile immediately put Daniel on alert, an instinct from his military days warning him of potential danger. "Mr. Morris," Richard greeted him, gesturing toward the other man. "This is Bradford Winters, head of our legal department." Daniel stood shaking hands with both men, his mind rapidly assessing the situation. The presence of corporate counsel suggested this wasn't a routine meeting about design modifications. "Please sit," Richard directed, taking his position behind the imposing desk, while Winters settled into the chair beside Daniel, opening a leather portfolio. "Mr. Morris," Winters began, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of expensive legal training, "we've become aware of information that raises concerns about potential conflicts of interest in your consulting arrangement with Lancaster Technologies." Daniel maintained a neutral expression despite the sudden tension that gripped his spine. "I'm not aware of any conflicts, but I'm happy to address specific concerns." Richard leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Your relationship with my daughter has progressed beyond professional boundaries, Mr. Morris. While your technical contributions have been valuable, this personal entanglement creates complications we cannot ignore." The directness of the accusation caught Daniel by surprise, though he kept his reaction controlled. "With respect, Mr. Lancaster, my friendship with Eva is separate from my professional responsibilities here. I've maintained strict confidentiality regarding all company matters." Winters removed several photographs from his portfolio, laying them on the desk where Daniel could see them. They showed Daniel and Eva at the community pool, at lunch with Lily at the hospital entrance, and at Eva's apartment building, a comprehensive surveillance record of their weekend activities. "The optics are problematic," Winters continued smoothly. "A consultant with access to proprietary technology developing a personal relationship with the CEO's daughter raises questions about motivations and information security." Daniel felt a flash of anger at the invasion of privacy but kept his voice steady. "If you had concerns, you could have asked me directly. There was no need for surveillance. Standard due diligence." Winters dismissed with a wave of his hand. "Lancaster Technologies protects its interests proactively." Daniel turned his attention to Richard, meeting his gaze directly. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Lancaster? That I pursued a relationship with Eva to gain access to company secrets, or that I accepted this consulting position to get closer to her?" Richard's expression remained impassive. "The sequence of events raises legitimate questions. You meet my daughter, then shortly thereafter are offered a position with my company, and now you're working on our most confidential project while developing a personal relationship with Eva." The implications were clear and fundamentally offensive to Daniel's sense of integrity. He took a measured breath before responding. "The chronology is accurate, but your interpretation isn't. I met Eva by chance. Your company approached me based on recommendations from existing clients, and my relationship with Eva has developed naturally through shared interests and values." He leaned forward slightly. "At no point have I discussed company matters with her, nor have I used my professional position to further a personal connection." Winters interjected smoothly. "Nevertheless, the potential for conflicts remains. We've prepared a supplemental agreement that addresses these concerns." He slid a document across the desk. "Essentially, it requires full disclosure of all interactions with Ms. Lancaster and establishes appropriate boundaries for the duration of your consulting contract." Daniel glanced at the document without touching it. "You want me to report my personal interactions with Eva to the company, to protect all parties involved?" Winters confirmed with practiced sincerity. "Transparency eliminates potential misunderstandings." Daniel looked directly at Richard. "And if I find these terms unacceptable, then our professional relationship would need to be reevaluated." Richard replied evenly. "The autonomy project requires absolute confidence in all team members." The ultimatum was clear. Choose the professional opportunity or the personal relationship. Daniel felt a cold clarity settle over him, the kind that had guided him through complex tactical situations in his military career. "I understand," he said, quietly rising from his chair. "In that case, I'll need to tender my resignation effective immediately." This was clearly not the response either man had expected. Winters looked startled, while Richard's expression showed the first crack in his composed facade. "That's an extreme reaction, Mr. Morris," Richard observed. "The agreement simply establishes professional boundaries." No, Daniel contradicted calmly. It attempts to control and monitor a personal relationship between consenting adults. That's not a professional boundary, it's an invasion of privacy. He buttoned his jacket, his movements deliberate and controlled. I've valued the opportunity to contribute to projects that could help many people, but I won't allow my personal integrity or relationships to be managed by corporate policy. Richard stood, his expression now showing genuine surprise. You would walk away from a lucrative position and groundbreaking technology over this? Without hesitation, Daniel confirmed. Some principles aren't negotiable, Mr. Lancaster. My professional ethics and personal relationships are among them. He extended his hand across the desk, maintaining the formalities, despite the tension crackling in the air. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll have my security credentials and materials returned to Margaret before I leave the building. Richard hesitated, then shook Daniel's hand, his expression now thoughtful rather than imperious. Your response is unexpected, Mr. Morris. Is it? Daniel asked quietly. You've been evaluating my character for weeks. This shouldn't come as a surprise. With that, he nodded to Winters, who remained uncharacteristically silent, and walked to the door. As he reached for the handle, Richard's voice stopped him. Mr. Morris, wait. Daniel turned, his expression questioning but resolute. Richard dismissed Winters with a subtle gesture. Once they were alone, Richard's demeanor shifted subtly, not exactly softening, but becoming more direct, less the corporate executive and more the concerned father. You genuinely care for her. Richard stated the words somewhere between question and realization. I do, Daniel confirmed simply. Though that's a conversation I should be having with Eva, not with you. Richard studied him with new intensity. And you'd sacrifice a significant professional opportunity rather than have your relationship monitored. Some things aren't for sale or negotiation, Daniel replied. My integrity, my relationships, Eva's dignity and agency. A long silence stretched between them, charged with evaluation and reassessment. Finally, Richard returned to his desk, pressing the intercom. Margaret, have Mr. Winters return tomorrow morning instead, and cancel my next appointment. He gestured for Daniel to retake his seat. I've misjudged you, Mr. Morris, or perhaps judged you accurately but through the wrong lens. Daniel remained standing. With respect, Mr. Lancaster, I need clarity before we continue this conversation. Are you speaking as the CEO of Lancaster Technologies or as Eva's father? The question seemed to surprise Richard, as if the distinction hadn't occurred to him. Both roles are inseparable in my life. But they shouldn't be, Daniel countered quietly. Your daughter deserves relationships that aren't filtered through corporate risk assessment. Richard's expression tightened momentarily, then relaxed into something more genuine than Daniel had yet seen from him. You're right. He acknowledged the admission, clearly difficult for him. Please sit. As Eva's father, I'd like to understand your intentions. Daniel considered the request, then nodded, returning to his seat. Fair enough, but I want to be clear, I won't discuss Eva as if she's not an equal participant in this conversation. Whatever develops between us is for her to help determine not just me, and certainly not through arrangements made without her knowledge. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying Daniel with new consideration. You consistently advocate for her agency, even against her father's wishes. Especially then, Daniel confirmed. Eva is an intelligent, capable adult. Her physical limitations don't diminish her right to make her own choices. Including choices I might consider mistakes, Richard asked directly. Especially those, Daniel replied without hesitation. That's what freedom means. Richard's expression suggested this perspective challenged his fundamental approach to parenting. You have a daughter. Would you not protect her from potential harm? Of course I would, Daniel acknowledged. But there's a difference between protection and control. One preserves dignity while preventing harm. The other prevents growth while offering safety. The distinction seemed to resonate with Richard, who fell silent for several moments, his gaze drifting to the photographs of Eva and her mother. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, less the CEO, more the grieving husband and worried father. After Catherine died, I promised myself I would protect Eva from further loss, he said quietly. Then the accident happened, and I failed at the most fundamental level. Since then, I've tried to create a world around her that minimizes additional pain. Daniel recognized the pattern, the same one he had fallen into after Sarah's death, building safeguards around Lily that sometimes threatened to become walls. I understand that impulse, Modi offered. After my wife died, I wanted to create an impenetrable bubble around Lily. It took time to realize that protecting her from life wouldn't prepare her for living it. Richard looked up, unexpected vulnerability in his expression. And if your protection fails, if despite your best efforts, Lily faces tragedy again, then I'll be there to help her through it, Daniel replied simply. Not to shield her from it, but to stand beside her as she faces it. The room fell silent as Richard absorbed this perspective so different from his own approach, yet rooted in the same fundamental love for a child. Eva hasn't brought anyone to the Foundation events in years, Richard finally said, changing direction. She's invited you to next week's gala. That's significant. Daniel nodded, accepting the implied question. I care deeply for Eva. Our connection has developed naturally based on shared values and mutual respect. Where it leads, we'll determine together. He met Richard's gaze directly. But I won't have that exploration governed by corporate agreements or paternal interference, however well-intentioned. Richard studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The supplemental agreement is withdrawn. Your consulting position remains as originally established if you are willing to continue. And the surveillance, Daniel asked pointedly. Discontinued, Richard confirmed. You have my word. Daniel considered the offer, weighing the professional opportunity against the breach of trust. I'd like to continue contributing to the autonomy project, he acknowledged. The technology has tremendous potential to help people. But our working relationship needs to be built on mutual respect, not suspicion. Agreed, Richard stated, extending his hand across the desk. This time the gesture carried different weight, not just professional courtesy, but a tentative step toward understanding. As Daniel left the office and made his way through the building, his mind processed the confrontation and its unexpected resolution. Richard Lancaster remained a complex figure, controlling yet caring, suspicious, yet capable of reassessment. The man clearly loved his daughter, even if his methods of showing that love sometimes did more harm than good. The consulting position would continue, but with a fundamental shift in the dynamic between Daniel and Richard. The surveillance and attempts at control had been firmly rejected, establishing boundaries that Richard had seemingly accepted, however reluctantly. Most importantly, Daniel had declared his feelings for Eva, openly naming what had been developing between them as something genuine and significant. The acknowledgement brought both clarity and complexity. The relationship was real and growing, with all the potential and challenges that entailed. As he drove to his workshop to complete the day's scheduled projects, Daniel realized a threshold had been crossed. The connection with Eva was no longer just potential or possibility. It had been declared, defended, and chosen even at potential professional cost. Now he needed to have an honest conversation with Eva herself about what had transpired and what might lie ahead. She deserved to know everything: the surveillance, the confrontation, and most importantly, the clarity it had brought about his feelings for her. His phone chimed with a text message as he pulled into the workshop parking lot. It was from Eva. Dad just called. Said you two had an illuminating discussion. His exact words. Should I be worried? Daniel smiled slightly at her perceptiveness, typing his reply. Not worried. But we should talk. Dinner tonight. Her response came quickly. Absolutely. My place, 7 p.m. I'll cook. I'll be there, he confirmed, putting away his phone and heading into the workshop. The familiar sense of wood and oil greeted him, the tangible materials and straightforward challenges, a welcome contrast to the complex human dynamics he'd just navigated. For the next few hours, he would lose himself in the precision of his craft, creating something solid and meaningful with his hands, while his mind processed the significant shift in his personal and professional landscape. Tonight would bring another important conversation, another step forward on a path that had opened unexpectedly before him. For now, though, there was wood to be shaped, joints to be fitted, and the meditative focus of craftsmanship to ground him in the present moment. 3 days later, Daniel's phone rang with a call from an unknown number. He was in his workshop putting the finishing touches on a custom bookcase and almost let it go to voicemail. Some instinct made him wipe his hands and answer. Daniel Morris? Mr. Morris, this is Dr. Petty from Memorial Hospital. The voice was professionally calm, but with an undertone of urgency. I'm calling about Eva Lancaster. You're listed as her emergency contact. Daniel's heart rate accelerated instantly. What happened? Is she all right? Ms. Lancaster experienced a severe autonomic dysreflexia episode at her apartment. Her building security found her unconscious and called an ambulance. She's stabilized now, but she's asking for you. I'm on my way, Daniel replied immediately, already reaching for his keys. Which department? Neurology, 4th floor. I'll alert the staff you're coming. Daniel called his neighbor, a retired teacher who often watched Lily when needed explaining the emergency, as he quickly cleaned up the most crucial elements in the workshop. Within 15 minutes, he was on the road to Memorial Hospital, his mind racing with concerns. Autonomic dysreflexia, he'd learned about the condition during his rehabilitation work with veterans. A potentially life-threatening complication for people with spinal cord injuries triggered by pain or discomfort below the injury level that the body couldn't properly process. The sudden blood pressure spike could cause stroke, seizure, or even death if not treated promptly. What had triggered Eva's episode? Was there something he should have noticed when they had dinner at her apartment? Had she mentioned any symptoms he'd missed? The hospital parking lot was crowded, forcing Daniel to park in a distant section and jog to the entrance. At the fourth-floor nurse's station, he identified himself and was immediately directed to room 412. Eva lay in the hospital bed monitors, tracking her vital signs, her complexion paler than usual, but her eyes alert. Relief washed over her face when she saw him. "Daniel, thank you for coming." He moved to her bedside, taking her outstretched hand. "What happened? Are you all right?" "Urinary tract infection," she explained, her voice steady despite the evident fatigue in her features. "Triggered a dysreflexic episode. My blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels. I managed to trigger my emergency alert before I lost consciousness." Daniel squeezed her hand gently, the professional part of his brain noting the medical details, while his emotional response focused on the fact that she was alive and conscious. "The doctor said you're stabilized." Eva nodded. "The immediate danger has passed. They've got me on antibiotics for the infection and monitoring to ensure there's no recurrence of the dysreflexia." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sorry to pull you away from work." "Don't apologize," Daniel replied firmly. "I'm glad you listed me as a contact." Eva's expression turned serious. "I should have warned you this could happen. It's a complication of my type of spinal injury. Usually I recognize the early signs, but this time it progressed rapidly." Daniel pulled a chair closer to the bed, still holding her hand. "Can you explain it to me, so I understand better?" Eva nodded, seeming to appreciate his direct approach rather than fearful hovering. She explained the condition in straightforward terms, how her body's normal pain response was interrupted by her spinal injury, creating a dangerous feedback loop that could spike her blood pressure and cause other serious complications if not addressed quickly. "It's manageable with awareness and prompt intervention," she concluded, "but it's also potentially life-threatening. That's something anyone in my life needs to understand." The subtext was clear. She was giving him an opportunity to reconsider their developing relationship in light of this medical reality. Instead of responding immediately, Daniel asked the practical questions his military training had taught him to prioritize in crisis situations. What are the warning signs? What actions help prevent or address an episode? What should I know if I'm with you when one occurs? Eva's expression softened at his response. Not retreat, but engagement. Not fear, but preparation. She detailed the symptoms, triggers, and emergency responses, watching as Daniel mentally cataloged the information with the focused attention he brought to any critical knowledge. "Your father knows you're here?" Daniel asked when she had finished. A shadow crossed Eva's face. "They called him. He's in Singapore for a major merger. He's arranging to fly back, but it will be at least 18 hours before he can get here." Daniel nodded, understanding the complex emotions beneath her matter-of-fact tone: concern for her father's worry, frustration at the disruption to his business responsibilities, and perhaps disappointment, though not surprise at his physical absence during her crisis. "What do you need right now?" Daniel asked simply. "Not what the doctors need or what your father would want, but what would help you most." The question seemed to catch Eva off guard, as if she wasn't accustomed to having her personal needs prioritized during medical situations. "Honestly, just normal conversation. Something that isn't about my medical condition or what went wrong or how to prevent recurrence. All that matters, but right now, I just want to feel like a person, not a patient." Daniel smiled, understanding completely. "Well, Lily made significant progress on her turnip costume last night. She's determined that it should have a face, despite Mrs. Peterson's insistence that turnips are faceless vegetables." Eva laughed, the sound bringing color back to her cheeks. "And what's your position on the great turnip face debate?" "Firmly neutral," Daniel replied with mock seriousness. "I'm merely the technical consultant on structural integrity and mobility considerations." Their conversation continued in this vein, deliberately ordinary topics that allowed Eva to temporarily escape the clinical environment and physical vulnerability of her situation. Daniel described his latest woodworking projects, shared Lily's school adventures, and discussed an art exhibition they had both been interested in attending. As the afternoon progressed, Eva's eyelids began to droop, the medication and recovery process demanding rest. Daniel gently squeezed her hand. "You should sleep. I'll be here when you wake up." "You don't have to stay," she murmured, already drifting towards sleep. "I'm stable now." "I know," Daniel replied softly. "I'm staying anyway." Eva's lips curved in a small smile as she succumbed to sleep, her hand still resting in his. Daniel settled into the uncomfortable hospital chair prepared for a long vigil. He texted his neighbor about the situation, arranged for Lily to be picked up from school, and notified his workshop clients about rescheduled appointments. With the practical matters addressed, he turned his attention to the sleeping woman before him. The medical emergency had clarified something important. His feelings for Eva weren't contingent or conditional. The potential complications of her condition didn't diminish his growing attachment. If anything, they deepened his respect for her daily courage and resilience. What had begun as admiration and attraction had evolved into something more profound, a connection that encompassed all aspects of who she was, including the physical realities of her injury. As evening settled over the hospital, a nurse entered to check Eva's vital signs, working quietly to avoid disturbing her sleep. "Family?" the nurse asked Daniel in a whisper. Daniel hesitated only briefly. "Yes," he answered simply. It wasn't legally accurate, but it expressed an emotional truth he could no longer deny to himself or others. The nurse nodded, seemingly satisfied. "She's doing well. Doctor will be by in the morning to discuss discharge, assuming her stats remain stable overnight." After she left, Daniel continued his quiet watch, the rhythmic sounds of the monitoring equipment and Eva's steady breathing, creating a strangely peaceful backdrop for his thoughts. Whatever challenges lay ahead, medical, familial, or logistical, they would face them together step by step with the same careful attention they both brought to their respective crafts. Some hours later, Daniel felt a presence and looked up to find Richard Lancaster standing in the doorway, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of hasty travel, rumpled suit, loosened tie, the stubble of a day without shaving. Their eyes met over Eva's sleeping form, mutual concern transcending their complicated history. "How is she?" Richard asked quietly, moving into the room. "Stable," Daniel replied in an equally low voice. "The infection is responding to antibiotics, and there have been no further dysreflexic episodes. She's been sleeping for about 3 hours." Richard nodded, his gaze fixed on his daughter's face. "You've been here the whole time?" "Yes." "Thank you," Richard said, simply, the words carrying genuine gratitude rather than the perfunctory politeness of their previous interactions. Daniel nodded, acknowledging both the thanks and the shift it represented. "She expected you wouldn't be able to get here until tomorrow." "I chartered a private jet from Singapore," Richard explained, removing his suit jacket and draping it over the back of a chair. "Some things take priority over mergers, however significant." The statement, so at odds with Eva's understanding of her father's priorities, caught Daniel by surprise. Richard must have noted his expression. "She doesn't believe I would put her before business," Richard observed, his voice tinged with regret. "I've given her ample reason for that assumption over the years." Daniel remained silent, recognizing that Richard was speaking more to himself than expecting a response. "Catherine would be disappointed in me," Richard continued, after a moment glancing at the sleeping Eva. "She always said I missed what mattered most while chasing what seemed most urgent." "It's never too late to reassess priorities," Daniel offered quietly. Richard's gaze returned to him, evaluative, but without the previous suspicion. "No, it isn't, though some patterns become deeply ingrained over time." He straightened slightly. "You should go home to your daughter, Mr. Morris. I'll stay with Eva now." Daniel hesitated, reluctant to leave despite the logic of the suggestion. "I promised I'd be here when she wakes." Richard studied him for a moment, then nodded with unexpected understanding. "Then we'll both be here. I'll have Margaret arrange for someone to stay with Lily tonight if that would help." The offer, practical support without power play or judgment, represented a significant shift in their dynamic. "Thank you, that would help, though I should call her first to explain." Richard gestured toward the door. "Use my phone. Better reception than the hospital allows, and you can speak normally without disturbing Eva." As Daniel stepped into the hallway to call Lily, he reflected on the unlikely development, he and Richard Lancaster maintaining a shared vigil for the woman who had unexpectedly become central to both their lives. Not as competitors, but as two men who, despite their differences, were united in their concern for her well-being. When he returned to the room, Richard had pulled a second chair to the opposite side of Eva's bed. They settled into their positions different in background, temperament, and perspective, but aligned in this moment of crisis. As the night deepened, Eva slept on unaware of the two watchful presences beside her, or the quiet transformation occurring in the relationship between them. A transformation born of shared concern, mutual respect, and the recognition that some connections transcend the boundaries of professional roles and initial impressions. The most significant challenges still lay ahead, but in this hospital room, a foundation was being laid for facing them together, not as adversaries, but as allies in ensuring Ava's well-being and supporting her independence. It wasn't friendship exactly, but it was something equally valuable, a hard-won mutual respect between two very different men who had found common ground in their care for the same remarkable woman. Morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, casting thin stripes across Eva's bed. She stirred her consciousness, returning gradually, then all at once, as she registered the unfamiliar surroundings. Her eyes opened to an unexpected sight, her father and Daniel both asleep in uncomfortable chairs on either side of her bed. Richard's head was tilted at an awkward angle, his normally immaculate appearance rumpled from international travel and a night spent in a hospital chair. Daniel's posture was more composed, even in sleep, his body accustomed to maintaining vigilance from military training. The sight of these two men so different in every way yet equally committed to staying through the night brought an unexpected tightness to Eva's throat. Before she could process the significance of the moment, a nurse entered to check her vital signs. "Good morning," the nurse greeted softly, noting the sleeping men. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Eva replied, her voice slightly hoarse from sleep and medication. "Much better." The nurse nodded approvingly as she checked the monitors. "Your numbers are excellent. Dr. Patel will be by around 8 to discuss discharge plans." At the sound of their voices, both men stirred. Daniel awakened instantly, a habit from his military days, while Richard transitioned more slowly from deep sleep to consciousness. "Eva," Daniel said, immediately alert to her condition, "how are you feeling?" "Dad?" Iva's attention shifted to her father, surprise evident in her voice. "You're here already. I thought you were in Singapore until tomorrow." Richard straightened in his chair, wincing slightly at the stiffness in his neck. "I caught the first available flight," he replied simply, as if crossing half the world on short notice was a minor adjustment to his schedule rather than the extraordinary effort it represented. Eva's eyes moved between the two men, taking in their rumpled appearances and the evidence of their overnight vigil. "You both stayed all night?" "Of course," they replied in near unison, then exchanged a glance of shared understanding that would have been unthinkable just days before. The nurse finished her checks and slipped out, leaving the three of them in a moment of connection that transcended their complicated relationships. Eva felt a rush of emotion, gratitude, yes, but also a profound sense that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic between the people who mattered most in her life. "Thank you," she said simply, the words inadequate for the feeling behind them. Daniel reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "No thanks needed." Richard cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the emotional current in the room, but making an effort to remain present rather than retreat behind his usual professional facade. "The doctor should be here soon, then we can get you home." "Home to my apartment," Eva clarified firmly, anticipating her father's assumption that she would return to the Lancaster estate for recovery. Richard hesitated, then nodded, surprising both Eva and Daniel with his lack of argument. "Of course, I'll have Margaret arrange for additional nursing support for the first few days." "That's not necessary," Eva began. "Please," Richard interrupted, his voice carrying an unusual note of vulnerability. "Let me do this much." Something in his tone, a father's concern without the usual controlling undertone, made Eva relent. "All right, thank you." Daniel squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "I should step out, give you two some privacy before the doctor arrives." "Actually," Richard said, rising from his chair, "I need to make some calls to reschedule today's meetings. Daniel, would you mind staying with Eva while I take care of those matters?" The request, Richard voluntarily stepping away and entrusting Eva's care to Daniel, carried significant weight. Daniel nodded, understanding the gesture for what it was, a deliberate ceding of control, a tentative extension of trust. Once Richard had left the room, Eva turned to Daniel with questioning eyes. "Something's happened between you two. What did I miss while I was unconscious?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Let's just say we reached a certain understanding." "That sounds ominous," Eva observed, studying his face. "Should I be worried?" "No," Daniel assured her, his expression softening. "But there are things we should discuss when you're feeling stronger." Eva reached for his hand again, her grip surprisingly firm, despite a recent medical crisis. "I'm feeling stronger now." "Tell me." Daniel hesitated, then nodded, recognizing her right to know what had transpired between the two men in her life. Carefully, he explained the confrontation in Richard's office, the surveillance, the ultimatum, his refusal to accept their terms, and the unexpected resolution that had followed. Eva's expression darkened at the revelation of her father's surveillance. "That's outrageous. He had no right." "He was afraid," Daniel interrupted gently. "Fear often masquerades as control." "You're defending him," Eva asked, surprise replacing anger. "Understanding isn't the same as defending," Daniel clarified. "Your father and I have very different approaches to protecting the people we care about. But the underlying motivation isn't so different." Eva was silent for a moment, absorbing this perspective. "And when my father gave you that ultimatum, the job or me, you chose me without hesitation." "There was no choice to make," Daniel replied simply. "Some things aren't negotiable." The depth of emotion in his voice made Eva's breath catch. Before she could respond, Dr. Patel entered with Richard following close behind. "Miss Lancaster, you're looking much better this morning," the doctor observed, reviewing the chart in her hands. "Your vitals are stable, and the infection is responding well to the antibiotics. I'd like to keep you until this afternoon for observation, but if all remains stable, you can go home today with oral antibiotics and a follow-up appointment scheduled for next week." The doctor provided detailed discharge instructions, emphasizing the importance of monitoring for early signs of autonomic dysreflexia and maintaining the antibiotic regimen to fully clear the infection. Eva listened attentively, asking precise questions about medication timing and potential side effects. "Do you have someone who can stay with you for the first 24-48 hours after discharge?" Dr. Patel asked. "While the risk of recurrence is low, it's best not to be alone during the initial recovery period." "I've arranged for nursing support," Richard interjected before Eva could respond. Dr. Patel nodded approval. "Excellent. I'll have the discharge paperwork prepared for this afternoon. In the meantime, rest and continue hydration." After the doctor left, an awkward silence descended on the room. Daniel checked his watch, aware of his responsibilities at the workshop and to Lily. "I should get home to Lily and handle some client calls," he said, rising from his chair. "I can come back this afternoon to help with the discharge process if you'd like." "I'd appreciate that," Eva replied, her eyes conveying more than her words. Richard cleared his throat. "I'll stay until the nursing staff arrives at Eva's apartment. After that, I have a board meeting I can't postpone." He hesitated, then added, "But I can cancel tomorrow's appointments if needed." The offer, so contrary to his usual prioritization of business matters, made Eva's eyebrows rise in surprise. "That's not necessary, Dad, but thank you for the offer." Daniel gathered his jacket, recognizing the need to give father and daughter privacy for what might be an important conversation. "I'll be back around 3 then." As he leaned down to say goodbye to Eva, she caught his hand, holding it firmly. "Thank you," she said softly, the words encompassing far more than his overnight vigil. Daniel nodded, understanding the unspoken depths. "Rest. I'll see you this afternoon." When he reached the door, Richard surprised him by following. In the hallway away from Eva's hearing, Richard spoke with uncharacteristic directness. "I've misjudged you from the beginning, Mr. Morris. That's become increasingly clear." Daniel met his gaze steadily. "We all make assessments based on our experiences and fears. The important thing is being willing to revise those assessments when evidence contradicts them." Richard nodded acknowledgement rather than agreement. "Eva values your presence in her life. That much is evident." He hesitated, then continued with visible effort. "And I believe I'm beginning to understand why." It was as close to an endorsement as Richard Lancaster was likely to offer, and Daniel recognized the significance of the concession. "She values your presence too," he replied, "even when you're at odds." A flicker of emotion crossed Richard's face, regret perhaps, or recognition of opportunities missed. "Safe journey home, Daniel. I'll see you this afternoon." The use of his first name, another small but meaningful shift, didn't escape Daniel's notice. Until then, Richard. As Daniel drove home through the morning traffic, he reflected on the events of the past 24 hours. Eva's medical crisis had crystallized something important, not just his feelings for her, but also the beginning of a different understanding with her father. Crisis had a way of stripping away pretense and forcing people to confront what truly mattered. For all three of them, priorities had become suddenly starkly clear. When he arrived home, he found Lily and his neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, at the kitchen table sharing breakfast. Lily launched herself at him the moment he entered. "Daddy is Miss Eva." "Okay." Mrs. Peterson said she was in the hospital. Daniel lifted his daughter into a hug, grateful for her uncomplicated affection. Miss Eva is doing much better. She had an infection that made her very sick, but the doctors gave her medicine and she's feeling better now. She'll probably go home from the hospital this afternoon. Can we visit her? I made her a get well card. Lily pointed to a colorful construction paper creation on the table decorated with glitter and an impressive rendering of what appeared to be Eva in her wheelchair, surrounded by flowers. That's beautiful, little bug. I'm sure she'll love it. Daniel set Lily down and thanked Mrs. Peterson for staying overnight. We'll visit Eva tomorrow if she's feeling up to it. Okay, Today she needs to rest. After Mrs. Peterson left and Lily was settled with her drawing supplies, Daniel made necessary calls to workshop clients, explaining the emergency and rescheduling appointments. Most were understanding, particularly when he mentioned hospital vigils and family medical issues without providing specific details. By mid-afternoon, he had completed the most urgent workshop task, arranged for Lily to spend the evening with her best friend Emma's family, and prepared himself mentally for whatever the discharge process might entail. As he drove to the hospital, he reflected on the practical implications of Eva's condition. The autonomic dysreflexia episode was a sobering reminder of the medical realities Eva lived with daily. If their relationship continued to deepen, he would need to become knowledgeable about all aspects of her condition, not to limit her independence, but to be a prepared and supportive partner in managing potential complications. At the hospital, he found Eva dressed and ready to leave her father, reviewing discharge papers with focused attention to detail. The scene struck Daniel as quintessentially Lancaster Richard, addressing a personal situation with the same meticulous care he would give to a corporate contract. Daniel, Eva greeted him, her smile warming her tired features. Right on time as usual. Military precision has its uses, he replied with a smile, noting that her color was better than this morning. How are you feeling? Ready to sleep in my own bed, she answered honestly. Hospital monitoring every 4 hours isn't conducive to restful recovery. Richard looked up from the paperwork. The nursing service will arrive at your apartment at 6. They'll stay overnight and reassess tomorrow whether continued support is needed. Eva nodded, having apparently accepted this arrangement during Daniel's absence. And Dad has promised they understand their role as support, not surveillance or control. The pointed comment made Richard wince slightly, but he nodded confirmation. Professional medical support only. Your privacy and independence will be respected. The nurse arrived with a wheelchair for the standard hospital discharge protocol, an irony not lost on Eva, who transferred from her hospital bed to the temporary chair with practiced ease. Daniel gathered her belongings while Richard completed the final paperwork. In the parking lot, they faced a logistical challenge. Eva's wheelchair-accessible van was at her apartment, and Richard's hastily acquired rental car wasn't equipped for her needs. I brought my truck, Daniel offered. It's not ideal, but I've helped transport wheelchair users before. If you're comfortable with it, we can manage the transfer. Eva nodded, appreciating his matter-of-fact approach. That works for me. With Eva providing clear instructions and Daniel's careful assistance, they managed the transfer from hospital wheelchair to truck with minimal difficulty. Richard observed the process with attentive concern, noting the efficient teamwork between Eva and Daniel, the unspoken communication, the respect for her autonomy, even while providing necessary support. I'll follow you to Eva's apartment, Richard stated, keys in hand. The nursing service will meet us there. The drive proceeded without incident, Daniel careful to avoid sudden stops or sharp turns that might be uncomfortable for Eva. They maintained casual conversation, deliberately avoiding medical topics in favor of Lily's latest school adventures and an upcoming art exhibition Eva had been looking forward to attending. At Eva's apartment building, the staff were clearly familiar with her, the doorman immediately arranging assistance and ensuring clear paths through the lobby. Daniel noted the subtle adaptations throughout the building: slightly wider corridors, accessible control panels, discrete ramps integrated into the upscale design. Eva had chosen her living environment, carefully balancing independence with necessary accommodation. Her apartment itself was a revelation, spacious but not ostentatious, with thoughtful design that incorporated accessibility features without making them the focal point. Natural light streamed through large windows, offering a view of the city park, and the decor reflected Eva's artistic background. Original artwork, carefully selected furniture that prioritized both function and beauty, and a color palette that created a sense of calm and openness. "This is lovely," Daniel commented sincerely, setting her hospital bag on the entryway table. "It suits you." Eva smiled, clearly pleased by his appreciation of her space. It took 3 architects and countless arguments with my father before we found the right balance, worth every heated discussion. Richard, entering behind them, raised an eyebrow, but didn't contradict her characterization of the process. The end result justified the process, he conceded, though I maintain the security system upgrades were a reasonable requirement. Eva rolled her eyes slightly, but with good humor rather than irritation. Dad's compromise I got independence. He got to install enough security technology to protect a small embassy. The easy banter between them suggested a healing that extended beyond Eva's physical condition, perhaps the beginning of a new understanding between father and daughter, catalyzed by the medical crisis and Richard's unprecedented prioritization of her needs above business demands. The nursing service arrived precisely at 6, a competent, professional woman named Helen, who immediately established the right tone deferential to Eva's preferences while clearly knowledgeable about her medical needs. Richard reviewed the service agreement with his characteristic thoroughness, then prepared to depart for his board meeting. "You have my private number," he reminded Eva, an unusual edge of uncertainty in his voice. "Call anytime for anything. The meeting can wait." "I will, Dad," Eva promised, her expression softening at his evident concern. "Thank you for coming home so quickly. It meant a lot." Richard hesitated, then leaned down awkwardly to embrace his daughter, a gesture that clearly surprised Eva, but which she returned with genuine warmth. "I'll check in tomorrow morning," he promised, straightening with what appeared to be reluctance. As he prepared to leave, Richard extended his hand to Daniel. "Thank you for your assistance today and last night." Daniel shook the offered hand, noting the shift in Richard's demeanor. Less the commanding CEO, more the concerned father willing to acknowledge another's contribution to his daughter's welfare. "No thanks necessary. I'm glad I could help." Once Richard had departed and the nurse had discreetly withdrawn to the guest room to organize medical supplies, Daniel and Eva found themselves alone for the first time since the hospital. Eva maneuvered her wheelchair to the living room, gesturing for Daniel to join her. "You should probably head home to Lily's soon," she acknowledged, "but I wanted a moment to talk privately first." Daniel settled into an armchair positioned at a comfortable conversational angle to her wheelchair, another thoughtful detail of the apartment's design. "Lily's with her friend Emma for the evening. I'm not in any rush." Eva nodded, gathering her thoughts. "When you told me about the confrontation with my father about choosing to resign rather than accept their conditions, you said there was no choice to make." Her eyes met his directly. "What did you mean by that exactly?" The directness of the question was characteristic of Eva, who had never shrunk from difficult conversations. Daniel appreciated her clarity and responded in kind. "I meant that some principles aren't negotiable. My personal integrity, your right to privacy and autonomy, and—" He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "The possibility of what's developing between us. That wasn't something I was willing to sacrifice for professional opportunity, however significant." Eva held his gaze, her expression thoughtful. "And what do you think is developing between us, Daniel?" He smiled slightly at her continued directness. "Something I wasn't looking for, but am increasingly grateful to have found. A connection based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care." He leaned forward slightly. "But I think the better question is what you believe is developing and what you want from it." Eva's expression softened. "What I believe is happening is that I've met someone who truly sees me as a complete person, not defined by either my wheelchair or my family name." Her hands, usually so steady on the controls of her chair, showed a slight tremor as she continued. "And what I want is the chance to explore that connection without artificial timelines or expectations, to see where it leads naturally." "That sounds right to me," Daniel agreed, relief and warmth spreading through his chest at her articulation of exactly what he'd been feeling. No pressure, no arbitrary expectations, just two people learning each other day by day. "With some complications," Eva added with rueful honesty. "A protective father, a medical condition with occasional serious episodes. A 6-year-old whose needs must come first in your life, as they should." "Life is complications," Daniel replied simply. "What matters is how we navigate them together." The word "together" hung between them, full of potential and significance. Eva's smile, tentative but genuine, suggested she found the prospect as hopeful as he did. "Speaking of complications," she said after a moment, "there's the Foundation Gala tomorrow night. I'd understand completely if you wanted to reschedule given recent events." Daniel shook his head. "If you're feeling up to attending, I'd still be honored to accompany you. Though I should warn you, my tuxedo is rented, not tailored." Eva laughed, the sound bringing welcome lightness to the room after the intensity of the past 24 hours. I promise not to tell the fashion police, though I should warn you in return these events involve considerable scrutiny and social politics. As my father's daughter and a Lancaster Foundation board member, I'm always under observation. I've faced insurgents in mountain passes, Daniel replied with a smile. I think I can handle judgmental socialites. Their conversation continued for another hour, moving from the practical logistics of the gala to Lily's school play preparations and Eva's upcoming art program expansion proposal. The easy flow between serious topics and everyday matters reflected the balanced foundation they were building, a relationship grounded in reality rather than romanticized ideals. When Daniel finally prepared to leave, promising to check in the following morning, Ava reached for his hand. Thank you, she said simply, for seeing what matters. He squeezed her hand gently. Rest well, Eva. I'll see you tomorrow. As he drove home through the evening traffic, Daniel felt a sense of clarity that had been building gradually since their first meeting. What had begun as a chance encounter had evolved into something with depth and potential, a connection worth protecting and nurturing whatever challenges might lie ahead. The Lancaster Foundation annual gala occupied the grand ballroom of the city's most prestigious hotel, transformed for the evening into a showcase of wealth, influence, and strategic philanthropy. Crystal chandeliers cast soft light over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements, while staff in formal attire circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The city's elite moved through the space in designer formal wear, air-kissing acquaintances and conducting the subtle business of social positioning that underlay such events. Daniel stood at the entrance, uncomfortably aware of the rented nature of his tuxedo, despite the rental company's assurances of its quality. His military bearing served him well, however providing a natural dignity that transcended clothing labels. Mr. Morris, a staff member approached with a tablet. Ms. Lancaster asked me to escort you to her table when you arrived. Daniel followed the young woman through the crowded room, noting the appraising glances directed his way. Curiosity about this unknown figure at a gathering where most faces were familiar to one another. At a premier table near the front of the room, he spotted Eva striking in a deep blue evening gown that complemented her dark hair, which was styled in an elegant updo. She turned as if sensing his approach, her face brightening visibly. Daniel, you made it. As promised, he replied, bending to kiss her cheek in greeting. You look beautiful. Thank you. Eva gestured to the open space beside her, where a chair had been removed to accommodate her wheelchair. I've already fielded a dozen questions about my mysterious guest. The rumor mill is working overtime. Daniel smiled as he took his seat. What's the leading theory? That you're either a potential major donor my father is cultivating, or a medical specialist brought in to consult on my condition, Eva replied with wry amusement. No one has guessed woodworker who makes amazing adaptive furniture and happens to be my date. The term date, used casually but deliberately, confirmed the nature of the evening for both of them. This wasn't simply a friend accompanying her to a foundation event. It was a public acknowledgement of their developing relationship. Speaking of your father, Daniel said, glancing around the room, will he be joining us? He's making the rounds. Mom, Eva explained, nodding toward where Richard stood, conversing with a group of silver-haired executives. As foundation chairman, he has obligatory networking to complete before dinner. He'll join us later. The remaining seats at their table filled gradually with foundation board members and major donors, each greeting Eva with varying degrees of warmth and Daniel with polite curiosity. Eva made introductions smoothly, neither over-explaining Daniel's presence nor allowing others to define it with their assumptions. Midway through the appetizer course, Richard joined them, impeccable in a tuxedo that Daniel suspected cost more than 3 months of his workshop earnings. To Daniel's surprise, Richard greeted him with apparent genuineness. Daniel, glad you could join us tonight. He took the seat on Eva's other side, completing their tableau. Eva flanked by the two most significant men in her life, a visual representation of the evolving dynamic between the three of them. The evening proceeded with the choreographed precision of long-established tradition. Dinner followed by the foundation director's presentation on the year's accomplishments, Richard's brief remarks as chairman, and recognition of major donors. Throughout, Daniel observed the subtle interactions between Eva and the foundation's beneficiaries, noting how she engaged with each person as an individual, rather than a funding source, demonstrating a genuine interest in their stories and motivations. During a break in the formal proceedings, as musicians set up for the evening's entertainment, Eva introduced Daniel to an elderly woman whose sharp eyes and direct manner suggested she was not a typical society matron. Daniel, this is Dr. Eleanor Harrington, my mother's mentor and my godmother. Eleanor, this is Daniel Morris. So you're the one causing all the whispers tonight, Dr. Harrington observed, extending a hand adorned with a single impressive emerald ring. Good. This event needed shaking up. It's become dreadfully predictable in recent years. Daniel shook her hand immediately, liking her forthright manner. I'm happy to provide the evening's entertainment, though unintentionally. Dr. Harrington laughed, a surprisingly robust sound from her slight frame. Eva tells me you design adaptive furniture. I'd like to hear more about that. My research foundation funds assistive technology development. What began as polite conversation quickly evolved into a detailed discussion of adaptive design principles, with Dr. Harrington demonstrating sophisticated knowledge of biomechanics and material engineering. Daniel found himself engaged in the most stimulating professional conversation he'd had in months, with Eva occasionally contributing insights from her perspective as a wheelchair user. You know, Dr. Harrington said thoughtfully after Daniel described his approach to designing for individual users with unique needs, we've been funding research into mass customization techniques that might interest you. The challenge has always been balancing personalization with production efficiency. That's precisely the issue, Daniel agreed. Custom solutions provide optimal results but reach few users. Mass production reaches many but serves none perfectly. What if there were a middle path, Eva suggested, her expression animated with sudden inspiration. A modular system with standardized core components but customizable elements that could be adapted to individual needs. Dr. Harrington's eyes lit up. Like building blocks that could be configured differently for each user, but manufactured efficiently because the base components remain consistent. Exactly. Daniel nodded immediately, seeing the potential. The frame and structural elements standardized, but the contact points, the interfaces between person and device, customizable through a systematic assessment process. Their discussion continued with increasing excitement, drawing Richard's attention from across the table. He listened for several minutes before joining the conversation. This sounds like an intriguing concept, he observed, potentially viable from both manufacturing and market perspectives. It would require cross-disciplinary collaboration, Dr. Harrington noted. Engineering, medical expertise, materials, science, and practical craft knowledge. She looked pointedly at Daniel as she mentioned the last element. And user experience, Eva added firmly. Design with users, not just for them. Richard studied the three of them, his analytical mind visibly processing the concept's potential. The Lancaster Foundation could fund an initial research phase, he suggested, surprising Daniel with his immediate engagement. A collaborative project between Harrington Research, Lancaster Technologies, and, he hesitated, then continued with deliberate inclusiveness, Morris Woodworking. The proposal, unexpected and significant, created a moment of stunned silence at their corner of the table. Dr. Harrington recovered first, her sharp eyes moving between Richard and Daniel. Interesting proposition, Richard. Not your usual approach to foundation initiatives. Richard's expression remained composed, but Daniel noted a subtle shift in his posture, a slight straightening of his shoulders, as if preparing to defend an unconventional position. Innovation requires new approaches, Eleanor, something Catherine always reminded me. The mention of Eva's mother, clearly a deliberate invocation of a respected voice now absent, carried weight with both women. Eva's expression softened, while Dr. Harrington nodded with somber acknowledgement. She would approve of this collaboration, Dr. Harrington stated with certainty, particularly the emphasis on user-centered design. She turned to Daniel. Would you be interested in such a project, Mr. Morris? It would involve working closely with research teams from both our organizations. Daniel considered the question carefully, aware of the professional opportunity it represented, but equally conscious of the personal complications. Working formally with Richard's Foundation and Company, while developing a relationship with Eva, would require careful navigation of boundaries and expectations. The concept has tremendous potential, he acknowledged, and I believe my experience with individual adaptations could contribute valuable insights to the research. He glanced at Ava, whose expression remained neutral, despite the obvious impact such a project would have on their personal connection. I'd want to establish clear parameters for my involvement, maintaining my independent workshop while contributing to the collaborative research. Richard nodded, seemingly approving of Daniel's measured response. Reasonable. We could structure a consulting arrangement similar to your current position with Lancaster Technologies, but focus specifically on this initiative. I'd like to be involved as well, Eva stated firmly, not just as a test subject, but as a project coordinator. My background in art curation included managing cross-disciplinary exhibitions with multiple stakeholders in complex logistics. Daniel watched as Richard processed this request, recognizing it as more than a professional proposition. It was Eva asserting her place in a project that bridged the disparate elements of her life. Her father's business world, her godmother's research community, and her relationship with Daniel would all intersect in this initiative. After a moment's consideration, Richard nodded. Your organizational skills would be valuable, and your perspective as both a foundation board member and a potential end user of the technology provides unique insights. The exchange, Richard acknowledging Eva's professional capabilities without qualification or protective limitations, represented significant progress in their relationship. Daniel observed the subtle relaxation in Eva's posture, the quiet satisfaction of being recognized for her abilities rather than defined by her limitations. Well, Mr. Harrington concluded with evident satisfaction. This is turning into a far more productive evening than the usual self-congratulatory speeches and checkbook philanthropy. I propose we meet next week to outline a formal project structure. She fixed Richard with a pointed look. At my offices, not Lancaster headquarters. Neutral territory. Richard's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. Agreed, Eleanor. Your diplomatic skills remain undiminished by age. As the evening's formal program resumed with musical entertainment, Daniel found himself contemplating the unexpected development. What had begun as a social occasion, his first public appearance with Eva, had evolved into a potential professional collaboration that could significantly impact his career and, more importantly, help countless people with mobility challenges. Eva leaned closer, her voice low beneath the music. Are you all right with this? I know it wasn't what you expected from tonight. Daniel smiled reassuringly. Life rarely delivers what we expect. The project has genuine merit, and the opportunity to create something with lasting impact is compelling. He hesitated, then added honestly, the personal complications will require careful navigation, but I believe we can manage them together. Eva's hand found his under the table, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture both intimate and grounding. Together, she agreed softly. That's the key word. As the evening drew to a close, Richard approached them during a break in the music. Eva, the foundation director, wants a photograph of board members for the annual report. Would you join us for a few minutes? Of course, Eva replied, releasing Daniel's hand and adjusting her position. I'll be right back, she told him with a smile before maneuvering her wheelchair toward the stage area where other board members were gathering. Left alone with Richard, Daniel prepared for potential awkwardness, but Richard surprised him by sitting in the chair Eva had vacated. This has been an unexpected evening. Richard observed, his tone conversational rather than confrontational. In several ways, Daniel agreed cautiously. Richard studied him for a moment, then spoke with uncharacteristic directness. My daughter is happier than I've seen her in years. Whatever my initial reservations about your presence in her life, I can't deny the positive effect it's had on her. The acknowledgement coming from a man who rarely admitted error or reconsidered first impressions carried significant weight. Daniel accepted it with equal directness. Eva's happiness matters to me, he stated simply. Her well-being, her independence, her fulfillment, those are priorities we share even if our approaches sometimes differ. Richard nodded slowly. Different approaches to the same goal. Perhaps there's wisdom in that diversity of perspective. He glanced toward where Eva was positioned among the board members, her natural poise and intelligent expression evident even from a distance. Catherine always said I was too quick to dismiss approaches that didn't align with my own. Another area where I'm still learning, apparently. The reference to his late wife the second that evening revealed something important about Richard's internal process. He was measuring his current actions against the wisdom of a woman whose judgment he had clearly respected deeply, finding his recent behavior wanting in comparison. It was a humbling process that Daniel recognized from his own experience of grief and self-reassessment after Sarah's death. Learning is a lifelong process. Daniel offered neither judgment nor platitude, but simple acknowledgement of a shared human experience. For all of us. Richard met his gaze with unexpected openness. Indeed. He straightened slightly, shifting back toward his more typical formality, though without the previous coldness. The modular adaptive design concept has genuine merit. I hope you'll consider participating in the research initiative regardless of any personal complications. I will, Daniel assured him. The potential impact is too significant to dismiss over concerns that can be managed with clear boundaries and open communication. Richard nodded, seemingly satisfied with this practical approach. Good. Eleanor will be a valuable ally in establishing those boundaries. She's never hesitated to tell me when I'm overstepping. A hint of wry humor colored his tone, humanizing him in a way Daniel hadn't previously observed. Their conversation was interrupted by Eva's return, her questioning glance moving between them as she noted their unexpectedly amicable postures. "Should I be concerned that you two are getting along?" she asked, only half joking. "It defies the natural order of things." Richard rose from her chair with a slight smile. "Evolution, not revolution, Eva. Small steps toward mutual understanding." As Richard moved away to speak with departing guests, Eva turned to Daniel with raised eyebrows. "That was unexpected. What did you talk about?" "Shared priority parties," Daniel replied honestly, "and the value of diverse perspectives in achieving common goals." Eva studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Diplomatic answer, but I'll accept it for now." She glanced around the gradually emptying ballroom. "Ready to make our escape. These events always run late, but the nurse will be waiting at my apartment." Daniel stood, offering his arm in a gesture that balanced assistance with respect for her independence. "Whenever you're ready." As they made their way toward the exit, saying appropriate goodbyes to board members and donors, Daniel reflected on the evening's developments. What had begun as a simple social occasion had evolved into something far more significant, the foundation for a professional collaboration that bridged their separate worlds, and perhaps more importantly, the beginning of a new understanding between the key people in Eva's life. Outside, the valet brought Daniel's truck around, and they managed the transfer from wheelchair to vehicle with practiced coordination. As they drove through the quiet city streets, Eva leaned her head back against the seat, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Not quite the evening either of us expected," she observed. "Life rarely is," Daniel replied, thinking of all the unexpected turns that had led them to this moment: a chance meeting over birthday cake, a medical emergency, a professional opportunity, and now a potential collaboration that united their separate worlds in common purpose. Eva's hand found his on the console between them, her touch warm and sure. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Daniel squeezed her hand gently in response, feeling the rightness of her presence beside him, of the path they were beginning to forge together. Whatever challenges lay ahead, medical, professional, or personal, they would face them as they had faced the recent crisis, with honesty, mutual respect, and the strength that came from recognizing what truly mattered. The truck continued through the night, carrying them toward a future neither had anticipated, but both now embraced one careful, deliberate step at a time. 6 months later, Daniel stood in the renovated warehouse space that now housed the Adaptive Design Research Center, a collaborative initiative of the Lancaster Foundation, Harrington Research, and Morris Woodworking. What had begun as a conversation at a charity gala had evolved into a fully operational research and development facility employing a diverse team of engineers, medical specialists, craftspeople, and most importantly, individuals with mobility challenges who served as both consultants and testers. The center occupied the ground floor of a historic industrial building renovated to exemplary accessibility standards while preserving its architectural character. Large windows flooded the space with natural light, illuminating workstations where prototypes in various stages of development were being tested and refined. At the heart of the facility was a spacious central area where users and designers collaborated, surrounded by specialized workshops, testing rooms, and a small medical facility for monitoring user comfort and physical responses during product trials. Daniel moved through the space with the quiet satisfaction of seeing a vision materialize into tangible reality. The modular adaptive design concept had evolved significantly through months of research, prototyping, and rigorous testing. The current system featured standardized core components that could be efficiently manufactured, combined with customizable interface elements tailored to individual user-specific needs through a systematic assessment process Eva had helped develop. "There you are," Eva's voice called from behind him. She maneuvered her wheelchair through the busy workspace with practiced ease, her professional attire and tablet computer reflecting her role as project coordinator. "The Harrington team just arrived for the demonstration. They're in the conference room with my father and Dr. Chen." Daniel nodded, gathering the materials he'd prepared for the presentation. "Final prototype is ready. The modifications we made after yesterday's testing session resolved the pressure point issue on the lumbar support. Excellent, Eva replied, her expression brightening. That was the last technical concern on Dr. Harrington's list. If today's demonstration goes well, we should receive approval for the expanded production phase. They moved together toward the conference room, their coordination natural after months of professional collaboration alongside their deepening personal relationship. What had begun tentatively had grown steadily stronger through shared purpose, mutual respect, and the careful navigation of the complex boundaries between their personal and professional connections. Richard Lancaster stood as they entered the conference room, his expression showing genuine pleasure rather than merely professional satisfaction. Daniel, Eva, we were just discussing the impressive user feedback data from the latest testing phase. Dr. Harrington as direct as ever, despite her 80 years cut to the chase. The numbers are compelling, but I want to see the final prototype in action before we commit to expanded production funding. Of course, Daniel agreed, unsurprised by her insistence on direct observation. We have 3 demonstration users scheduled, each representing different mobility challenges and body types. The first should be arriving shortly. The presentation proceeded with methodical thoroughness, each demonstration user testing the prototype, while Daniel explained the specific adaptations made for their individual needs. Eva facilitated the process, her rapport with the users creating a comfortable environment for honest feedback, while technical staff collected data on pressure distribution, ergonomic alignment, and user comfort. Throughout the demonstrations, Daniel observed Richard watching with an expression that blended professional assessment with personal pride, not just in the technology's success, but in Eva's evident competence as she coordinated the complex demonstration with natural authority and genuine compassion for the users. When the formal presentation concluded and the technical teams began discussing production specifications, Richard drew Daniel aside while Eva conferred with Dr. Harrington about the next phase of the project. The prototypes exceed our projections. Richard observed, his tone reflecting genuine respect rather than mere professional acknowledgement. Your integration of traditional craftsmanship with advanced materials has created something truly innovative. The cross-disciplinary approach was key, Daniel replied, giving credit where it was due. Your engineer's expertise with the carbon fiber components combined with Dr. Chen's biomechanical insights and our woodworking techniques created something none of us could have developed independently. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Collaboration has its strengths, he acknowledged with a glance toward Eva that suggested he wasn't referring exclusively to the technical project. Sometimes the strongest solutions emerge from seemingly disparate approaches. Before Daniel could respond, Eva joined them, her expression reflecting controlled excitement. Dr. Harrington has approved the expanded production phase. We can begin implementing the manufacturing process next month with the first production units available for distribution by year's end. That's excellent news, Richard replied, his satisfaction evident. The board will be pleased with the accelerated timeline. We need to celebrate, Eva declared, looking between the 2 men who had found an unexpected working harmony over the past months. Dinner tonight, I'll invite the core team and Dr. Harrington. Unfortunately, I have a flight to Tokyo in 3 hours. Richard apologized, genuine regret in his voice. The merger negotiations require my presence. He hesitated, then added with uncharacteristic warmth, but I'd like to host a proper celebration when I return next week. At the house, not a restaurant, something more personal than professional. The offer revealing Richard's desire to mark the achievement in family space rather than corporate territory reflected the gradual but significant evolution in their relationships. Eva's surprise quickly transformed to pleasure. I'd like that, Dad. We all would. As Richard departed for his flight and the technical teams dispersed to their respective tasks, Daniel and Eva found themselves alone in the now quiet demonstration area. Eva looked around the space with evident satisfaction. 6 months ago, this was just a concept discussed at a charity gala, she observed. Now it's going to help thousands of people maintain their independence and dignity. Daniel nodded, equally moved by the tangible impact of their collaborative work. From chance meeting to life-changing innovation. Not the path either of us expected. Eva maneuvered her wheelchair closer, reaching for his hand. The best paths rarely are, she replied softly. Speaking of unexpected paths, I've been thinking about something. The slight hesitation in her voice caught Daniel's attention. What is it? Lily mentioned yesterday that the commute between our places is getting tiresome, Eva began carefully. She said, and I quote, grown-ups make things too complicated. Daniel smiled at the characteristic directness of his daughter, who had formed a deep bond with Eva over the past months. The wisdom of children, what exactly did she suggest as a solution? That we should just live in the same house, obviously? Eva replied with a small smile, followed by a detailed explanation of how her room could be at my apartment, or I could move to your house, but either way, everyone would be happier with less driving back and forth. The suggestion delivered through Lily's innocent perspective addressed something they had been gradually approaching in their own cautious way. Their relationship had deepened steadily, with Daniel spending several nights a week at Eva's apartment and Eva often joining them for weekends at Daniel's home. Lily had embraced Eva's presence in their lives with wholehearted enthusiasm, while Eva had formed a genuine bond with the child based on shared interests and mutual affection rather than calculated effort. Lily has always had good instincts about what matters. Daniel observed his tone deliberately light despite the significance of the conversation. What are your thoughts on her proposal? Eva met his gaze directly, her expression reflecting the straightforward approach that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. I think she's right that we're making things unnecessarily complicated. I think we've been careful appropriately so, but perhaps it's time to be bold instead. Daniel nodded slowly, considering her words. Bold, not reckless, he clarified, with awareness of what it means especially for Lily. Of course, Eva agreed immediately. She's the priority in any decision. But Daniel, she hesitated, then continued with characteristic honesty. I love you. I love Lily. I love the life we're building together piece by piece. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that we're already a family in all the ways that matter. The declaration, simple but profound, resonated with everything Daniel had come to feel over the past months. The careful beginning had evolved into something deep and enduring, a connection based on shared values, mutual respect, and genuine love. I love you too, he replied, the words carrying the weight of considered truth rather than impulsive emotion. And you're right, we've become a family, step by careful step. Making it official seems like the natural next phase. Eva's smile illuminated her face, joy unrestrained by the professional setting. So we're doing this, moving in together, officially blending our lives. Yes, Daniel confirmed, squeezing her hand gently, though we should probably discuss the logistics with a bit more detail than Lily's obviously planned. Eva laughed, the sound reflecting both happiness and relief. Details matter, she agreed. Your house makes more sense. Practically, the workshop is there. Lily's school is nearby, and you've already made most of the necessary accessibility modifications. Daniel nodded, having reached the same conclusion, but wanting Eva to participate fully in the decision. But your apartment has advantages too. The building's integrated accessibility features proximity to the research center, better security systems. Always the practical problem solver, Eva teased gently. Let's take a week to evaluate both options objectively, then decide. Either way, we're making this transition together as a family. The word family, spoken with such natural certainty, warmed Daniel in ways he hadn't experienced since losing Sarah. What had begun as unexpected connection had evolved into something he hadn't dared hope for, a second chance, at the kind of deep partnership that made life's challenges bearable and its joys more profound. Together, he agreed, the simple word encompassing all they had built and all that lay ahead, a shared path neither had anticipated, but both now embraced fully, eyes open to both its challenges and its profound rewards. 1 year later, the Adaptive Design Research Center hosted its first open house, showcasing the commercially available products, now helping hundreds of users maintain independence and dignity. The warehouse space had expanded to include a manufacturing facility where modular components were produced with precision, while custom elements were crafted to individual specifications. In the demonstration area, Eva guided visitors through the assessment process, while Daniel explained the technical innovations to interested medical professionals and potential users. Lily, now 7, proudly helped at a children's station where young visitors with mobility challenges could test specially designed art supplies and adaptive toys. Richard Lancaster observed the scene from near the entrance, his expression reflecting quiet satisfaction. The project had exceeded even his ambitious expectations, with preliminary data showing significant quality-of-life improvements for users and strong market response to the innovative approach. More importantly, he watched his daughter moving through the space with confident purpose, respected by the team she led and visibly fulfilled by work that united her personal experience with professional capabilities. He watched Daniel demonstrating a custom adaptation to an elderly veteran, the craftsman's hands gentle and sure, as he adjusted the device to the man's specific needs. And he watched Lily embodying the natural compassion both her father and Eva had nurtured in her, helping a young girl in a wheelchair find the perfect adaptive paintbrush for her limited hand mobility. Mr. Harrington joined him, her sharp eyes missing nothing of his contemplative observation. "Quite a success, Richard. Catherine would be proud of what you've built here." Richard shook his head slightly. "What we've built together," he corrected, nodding toward where Daniel and Eva now stood side by side explaining a technical feature to interested visitors. "I merely provided resources. The vision was theirs." Dr. Harrington murmured with characteristic directness. "Not like you to share credit so readily. Marriage has had a humanizing effect on you." Richard smiled slightly at her deliberate provocation. "Not marriage yet, Eleanor, though I understand Daniel has plans in that direction." "About time," she observed briskly. "They've been a family in every meaningful sense for months. The legal formalities are merely catching up to reality." Richard nodded, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. "Some transitions require careful navigation. Daniel understands that better than most." "He's good for her," Dr. Harrington stated, watching as Eva laughed at something Daniel said, her face illuminated with a joy Richard hadn't seen since before her accident. "And for you, though you'd never admit it." Before Richard could respond, Lily bounded over her energy, undiminished despite hours of enthusiastic participation in the open house. "Grandpa Richard, come see what we made in the workshop. We designed a special paintbrush holder for kids whose hands shake, and it really works." The title Grandpa Richard was relatively new, adopted after careful discussion among all parties once Daniel and Eva had made their permanent commitment official. Richard had been unexpectedly moved by the designation, though he maintained his typical reserve in expressing that emotion. "I'd be delighted to see it," he replied with genuine interest, allowing the child to lead him toward the children's area, her small hand confidently grasping his larger one. Mr. Harrington watched them go, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The Lancaster Foundation's most successful project wasn't measured in production units or market share, but in the restored connections between a father and daughter and the new family that had formed around a chance meeting over birthday cake. As the open house continued, visitors moved through displays highlighting the center's achievements and ongoing research. Near the entrance, a simple plaque summarized the philosophy that had guided the project from concept to reality. "The greatest tools are those that become extensions of ourselves, enhancing capability while preserving dignity, designed with both precision and compassion." In honor of Catherine Lancaster and Sarah Morris, whose spirits guide this work. The acknowledgement linking the absent women whose lives had shaped the three central figures in this unexpected story represented the final integration of separate paths into a shared journey. What had begun as chance encounter had evolved into deliberate commitment, creating a family bound not by conventional expectations, but by choice respect, and the courage to build something meaningful from life's unpredictable materials. Like the finest craftsmanship, the result was both beautiful and enduring, a testament to skilled hands guided by caring hearts.